2025 was a massive year for archaeology. New ancient temple sites appeared in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. Lost cities were mapped beneath the Amazon canopy. And in Tanzania, researchers identified 1.5-million-year-old bone tools, the oldest ever found. Combined with breakthroughs in LiDAR scanning, DNA analysis, and AI-driven text recovery, archaeologists were able to study the past with a level of precision we've never had before. So settle in as we walk through the 23 most incredible, groundbreaking, and downright strange discoveries made this year. We have lost cities, forbidden tombs, impossible artifacts, and biological mysteries that rewrite the human story. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and let the outside world fade for a while. It's been a remarkable year for the past, and we've got a lot to uncover together. And before we start, make sure to subscribe for more ancient mysteries and archaeology videos every single week. Now, let's get started. Deep in the foothills of the Andes in eastern Ecuador lies the Upano Valley. It is a region of dense vegetation and steep slopes that has long been difficult for archaeologists to survey on foot. For decades, researchers knew that ancient people had lived there, finding pottery shards and creating rough maps of mounds hidden in the undergrowth. But the density of the forest made it impossible to see the full picture, until now. In a major study highlighted this year, a team led by archaeologist Steven Rostaing from the French National Center for Scientific Research used LiDAR technology to digitally strip away the tree canopy. Published in the journal Science, their work revealed what lay underneath, not just a collection of scattered villages, but a dense urban network spanning more than 100 square miles. The scans revealed over 6,000 earthen platforms arranged in precise geometric patterns. These were not natural formations, but the foundations of houses and ceremonial buildings constructed by a lost culture that flourished here, starting around 500 BC. The sheer scale of the earthworks is difficult to grasp from the ground level. The researchers identified rectangular platforms measuring roughly 40 feet wide and up to 10 feet high. These were built up from the valley floor to provide dry, stable foundations for wooden structures which have long since rotted away. The platforms were arranged around central plazas, suggesting a highly organized society with distinct neighborhoods and civic centers. Some of the largest complexes required moving thousands of tons of soil, reshaping the natural topography to suit their needs. Perhaps the most impressive discovery was the infrastructure connecting these settlements. The cities were linked by an intricate network of straight, wide roads. The largest of these roads were 30 feet wide and stretched for miles, cutting through the landscape with a precision that implies central planning. These were not winding footpaths, but highways designed for heavy traffic, suggesting a bustling trade network and constant interaction between the different urban centers. The straightness of the roads is particularly notable, as it required the builders to dig through hills and fill in ravines to maintain their course. The space between the settlements was filled with agricultural fields drained by an extensive system of canals and ditches. This allowed the inhabitants to control the flow of water in a region prone to heavy rainfall. They managed the soil, cultivating crops like maize and manioc on a scale that could support tens of thousands of people. The landscape was essentially a continuous web of homes and farms, described by the researchers as a garden city where the line between the urban and the rural was blurred. We know that two distinct cultures occupied this region. The Quillamopi people first settled the valley around 500 BC, followed later by the Upano culture, which inhabited the sites until around 600 AD. They occupied this region for over 1,000 years, creating a built environment that was entirely artificial. The pottery found at the sites suggests a culture rich in art and ritual, consuming maize beer and participating in complex social gatherings. The population estimates for the Upano Valley are significant. Based on the number of platforms, researchers believe the area was home to at least 10,000 people, and possibly as many as 30,000 at its peak. To put that in perspective, this is roughly the same population as Roman London. It suggests that the Amazon basin was capable of supporting large, complex societies long before the arrival of Europeans. The reason these cities remained hidden for so long is simple. The people of the Upano Valley built with the only resource they had in abundance, which was earth. Unlike the Maya or the Inca, who left behind stone monuments that survive the centuries, mud and soil erode and disappear under the jungle growth. Without LiDAR, these massive complexes look like nothing more than natural hills to the naked eye. This discovery adds a crucial piece to the puzzle of pre-Columbian South America. It shows that complex urbanism was not limited to the Andes or the coast, but extended deep into the tropical lowlands. The Upano Valley was a thriving, engineered landscape where humans had fully mastered their environment. As scanning technology improves, we are likely to find that this was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a wider network of settlements hidden beneath the canopy. While the jungles of the Amazon were finally revealing their secrets to LiDAR, another massive discovery was taking place halfway across the world. This time, it wasn't in a forest, but on the wide, open grasslands of the Eurasian steppe. For generations, historians have told a specific story about this part of the world. We have always been taught that the steppe was a highway for nomads. The traditional view is that people here lived in yurts and temporary camps, moving with the seasons to graze their herds of cattle and sheep. They were masters of the horse, but they didn't build cities. They didn't stay in one place long enough to leave behind anything more than burial mounds. But in November 2025, a new survey completely shattered that idea. An international team led by Dr. Miljana Radivojevic from University College London and Dr. Viktor Merz from Torajgirov University published the first detailed look at a site known as Semiyarka, or the City of Seven Ravines. The story of its discovery actually starts decades ago, during the Cold War. In the 1960s, Soviet spy satellites known as the Corona program were snapping high-resolution photos of the Earth to track military movements. When those images were finally declassified years later, archaeologists noticed something strange in the images of northeastern Kazakhstan. On a high piece of land overlooking the Irtysh River, there were faint geometric shadows in the grass. They looked too straight, too organized to be natural. But for a long time, no one had the money or the resources to go out there and properly investigate what those shadows really were. That changed this year, using advanced drones and magnetometry, which basically acts like an X-ray machine for the ground. The team finally revealed the truth. Semiyarka wasn't just a campsite. It was a sprawling Bronze Age metropolis covering nearly 350 acres. To give you an idea of how big that is, this settlement is roughly 3 times larger than any other site from the same period found in the region. It dates back to around 1600 BC. That puts it in the same time period as the famous palaces of Mycenaean Greece and the height of the Shang dynasty in China. But unlike those famous civilizations who built with stone and brick that lasted for thousands of years, the people of Semiyarka built with the earth itself. That is why their great city remained hidden in plain sight for so long. It had literally melted back into the landscape. The scan results were shocking. They showed that this city wasn't a chaotic jumble of tents that grew over time. It was highly planned. The team mapped out 2 massive rows of rectangular earthen mounds stretching across the terrain. These were the foundations of permanent, multi-room houses. They were arranged in a strict grid, which tells us that someone was in charge. You don't get a grid like that by accident. You get it when a central authority plans the city before a single brick is laid. The layout is so precise that researchers think the whole complex might have been built in a single, massive burst of construction. Imagine the coordination that would take. Thousands of people, who supposedly were used to wandering the open plains, coming together to build a permanent capital from scratch. At the very center of the settlement lies a huge building. It is oriented almost exactly east to west, and it is twice the size of the surrounding homes. Archaeologists think this might have been a community meeting hall, a temple, or perhaps the palace of a ruling family. The fact that this big central building exists tells us that this society had a hierarchy. There were leaders and followers, rich and poor, something we didn't think existed among the simple herders of the steppe. But the real game changer was found on the southeastern edge of the city. Here, the soil was different. It was littered with debris, slag, broken crucibles, and waste rock. This was a dedicated industrial zone. Analysis of the artifacts confirmed that the people of Semillarca weren't just making trinkets. They were running a massive factory for the production of tin bronze. This is a critical detail because of the ingredients involved. To make bronze, you need copper and tin. The copper was easy enough to find nearby. The ores found at the site were mostly malachite and azurite, likely mined from local deposits. But tin is rare. The nearest major sources of tin are in the Altai Mountains, hundreds of miles away. This proves that Semillarca was a major hub in a supply chain that stretched across the continent. These people were importing raw materials from distant mountains, processing them in an industrial district, and then likely exporting finished weapons and tools to tribes all over Eurasia. This trade network existed more than 1,000 years before the famous Silk Road. The location of the city makes perfect sense when you look at it this way. It sits on a high promontory right where the landscape breaks into 7 deep ravines, hence the name. It overlooks the Irtysh River, which would have acted like a superhighway for boats carrying heavy cargo. From their high walls, the people of Semillarca could control the river traffic moving north and south, taxing the trade or protecting their own shipments. The science behind their metalworking was incredibly advanced. Chemical analysis shows that the smiths at Semillarca were using a complex method called co-smelting. They were mixing minerals to create high-quality alloys with up to 12% tin content. This isn't something a hobbyist does in their backyard. This level of consistency suggests there was a class of professional metalworkers who did nothing else. They weren't out farming or herding animals. They were full-time specialists supported by the food grown by the rest of the community. The excavations also gave us a clue about who these people were. Most of the pottery found at the site belongs to a group archaeologists called the Alexivka Sargari culture. These people were known for settling down in one place. But the team also found pottery from the Cherkassal culture, a group that came from the forest regions of the Ural Mountains to the north. This mix of pottery styles paints a picture of a cosmopolitan city. Semillarca was likely a meeting place where the forest people of the north came to trade with the steppe people of the south. You can imagine the markets, filled with furs, timber, and honey from the forests, being swapped for the high-quality bronze weapons and tools produced in the city's workshops. There is one strange detail that has sparked a debate among the researchers. While the architecture is massive and permanent, the amount of trash, broken pots, and animal bones found on the surface is relatively low compared to cities in the Middle East. This has led to a fascinating theory. Maybe Semillarca was a seasonal city. It's possible that the population swelled during the summer months for huge trade fairs, religious festivals, and metal production, but then shrank during the harsh, freezing winters of the steppe. It suggests a unique way of living that doesn't fit neatly into our boxes of settled versus nomadic. It was a city built by people who still heard the call of the open plains. Dr. Radivojevich described the site as a true urban hub of the steppe. It forces us to rewrite the history books for Central Asia. It proves that the nomadic tribes were not primitive people who lived in tents because they didn't know how to build walls. They had the knowledge and the skill to build massive, organized cities whenever they wanted to. They just usually chose not to. But at Semillarca, for reasons we are still trying to understand, they decided to stop wandering and build a powerhouse that would dominate the region's economy for centuries. As the excavation continues into next year, Semillarca offers us a rare chance to see the engine that powered the Bronze Age. It reminds us that civilization doesn't always look like stone pyramids or marble columns. Sometimes it looks like earthen walls on a lonely, windswept plateau, hiding the secrets of an industrial superpower that we are only just beginning to understand. Leaving the city of seven ravines, we travel to the arid canyons of Jordan. For over 200 years, the ancient city of Petra has been one of the most visited archaeological sites on Earth. Its defining monument is Al-Kazne, or the Treasury, a massive facade carved directly into the pink sandstone cliff face. It is a structure that has become a global icon, famously appearing as the resting place of the Holy Grail in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For decades, tourists have walked across the sandy floor in front of the Treasury, assuming the site had been fully mapped. In late 2024, leading into the 2025 season, a joint mission involving the Jordanian Department of Antiquities and the American Center of Research, led by Executive Director Dr. Pierce Paul Kriesman, returned to the site armed with ground-penetrating radar. They were investigating the theory that there were additional chambers beneath the plaza. The radar scans revealed strong anomalies, suggesting void spaces that did not match the known geology. Permission was granted to excavate, a rare occurrence at such a protected World Heritage Site. As the team, joined by Josh Gates and the crew of Expedition Unknown, dug beneath the facade, they uncovered the entrance to a buried tomb. Unlike most tombs in Petra, which were emptied by raiders centuries ago or reused by later inhabitants, this chamber was pristine. Inside, the archaeologists found the complete skeletal remains of 12 individuals. To understand the magnitude of this find, we have to understand the people who built it. The Nabateans were originally a nomadic Arab people who emerged from the desert to control the lucrative incense trade routes of the ancient world. They became the wealthy middlemen of antiquity, transporting frankincense and myrrh from the southern Arabian Peninsula to the temples and palaces of Rome and Greece. It was this immense wealth that allowed them to carve a metropolis out of solid rock in the middle of the desert. Yet, despite their architectural legacy, they left behind very few written records, making them one of history's most enigmatic civilizations. Their success wasn't just economic, it was engineering. The Nabateans were masters of hydrology in a landscape that received only inches of rain a year. They carved channels into the rock faces to capture flash floods, directing the water into massive underground cisterns lined with waterproof cement. This allowed Petra to support a population of 30,000 people and serve as an oasis for caravans crossing the desert. Without this mastery of water, the city and the treasury itself would have been impossible. The treasury has always been an architectural puzzle. Its design is a unique fusion of Hellenistic Greek style and indigenous Arabian tradition. The facade features Corinthian columns and figures from Greek mythology, such as Castor and Pollux, but also incorporates local symbols like the urn. For centuries, scholars debated its function. Was it a temple to the goddess Isis, a treasury for collecting taxes, or a royal tomb? The name Al-Kazne comes from a local Bedouin legend that an Egyptian pharaoh hid his gold in the stone urn that sits atop the facade. For generations, tribesmen fired rifles at the urn hoping to shatter it and release the gold, and bullet marks are visible on the stone today. But the excavation revealed the real value was below ground. Among the bronze, iron, and ceramic grave goods, one object stood out. One of the skeletons was found clutching a ceramic chalice. The shape of the vessel bore a coincidental but striking resemblance to the prop used in the Indiana Jones film, shot at the same location. While it was actually the top of a broken juglet rather than a significant artifact, its presence in the tomb was a notable curiosity, given the site's pop culture history. The discovery helps clarify the true purpose of the treasury. The presence of 12 skeletons buried directly beneath the main structure strongly supports the theory that the treasury was built as a royal mausoleum. Based on pottery and sediment analysis, the tomb dates to the reign of King Aretas IV, who ruled from roughly 9 BC to 40 AD. Aretas IV was the greatest of the Nabatean kings, presiding over Petra's golden age. His daughter, Phasaelis, was married to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, linking the Nabatean royal family directly to the biblical history of the region. Under Aretas, Petra grew into a sophisticated urban center, and it is fitting that the city's most iconic monument would serve as his family's final resting place. The condition of the skeletons is scientifically important. Finding complete remains in Petra is rare due to the humidity and the acidic nature of the sandstone, which tends to disintegrate bone. Additionally, Nabatean burial practices often involve the secondary burial of bones, making individual identification difficult. The preservation of these 12 individuals allows scientists to analyze their DNA, potentially revealing their age, health, diet, and genetic relationships. This provides the first concrete biological data on the Nabatean royalty who built this city. This discovery confirms that the treasury was not just a ceremonial facade, but an active part of the Nabatean royal necropolis. It suggests that even at the world's most famous sites, significant history remains underground. As Dr. Kriesman noted, there is still much to learn about who exactly these 12 people were and how they relate to the king buried above them. The excavation is ongoing, and future DNA results may finally put names to the builders of Petra. Of all the archaeological sites in the world, few capture the imagination quite like Herculaneum. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it buried this Roman seaside town under 60 feet of volcanic mud. While Pompeii was destroyed by falling ash and pumice, Herculaneum was sealed in an airtight tomb of pyroclastic flow. This unique preservation saved something that was lost everywhere else in the ancient world: a library. In the 18th century, excavators digging tunnels beneath the modern town of Ercolano broke into a massive Roman villa. It was later identified as the Villa of the Papyri, named after the incredible discovery found inside. They discovered hundreds of carbonized scrolls. These ancient texts had been baked by the intense heat of the eruption, turning them into lumps of charcoal that looked exactly like burnt logs. For centuries, scholars tried to open them. They used knives, mercury, and specialized unrolling machines invented by a priest in the 1700s. But almost every attempt ended in disaster. The carbonized layers were so fragile that they crumbled into dust the moment they were touched. We knew we possessed the only surviving library from antiquity, but we couldn't read a single word of it without destroying it. So, the scrolls were locked away in museums, a collection of unreadable black lumps that held the lost wisdom of the ancient world. The solution didn't come from a trowel or a brush. It came from particle physics and artificial intelligence. The breakthrough began with Dr. Brent Seals, a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky. He realized that if you couldn't physically unroll the scrolls, you had to unroll them digitally. His team used a particle accelerator called a synchrotron to scan the scrolls with high-energy X-rays. This created a detailed three-dimensional model of the inside of the charcoal lumps. You could see the layers of papyrus wrapped around each other like a jelly roll. But there was a problem. The ink used by the Romans was made of carbon, and the papyrus was also carbon. On a standard X-ray, the ink was invisible. It was black ink on black paper. To solve this, Seals launched the Vesuvius Challenge in 2023. It was a global competition that released the high-resolution scans to the public and offered a massive cash prize to anyone who could train an AI to see the invisible ink. The idea was that the ink, even if chemically similar to the paper, would leave a tiny texture or a slightly different density, a crackle pattern, that a machine learning algorithm could detect. The first major success stunned the world in late 2023. A student named Luke Ferrator successfully trained an AI model to detect the ink, revealing a single, clear word from the heart of a sealed scroll. Porphyros, ancient Greek for purple. It was the first time in 2,000 years that a human had read a word from inside an unopened Herculaneum scroll. It proved the concept worked. By early 2024, the grand prize was claimed. A team of 3 students, Youssef Nader, Luke Farrader, and Julian Schilliger, combined their code to read not just a word, but entire columns of text. Now, in 2025, we are witnessing the full impact of that victory. The technology has moved from a proof of concept to a production line. Dr. Seals and the Vesuvius Challenge team are currently scaling up the virtual unwrapping process, scanning more scrolls, and refining the AI to read them faster and cheaper. What was once a trickle of letters has become a flood of philosophy. The text decoded by the Grand Prize team has now been fully translated and analyzed. It is a previously unknown philosophical work by Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century BC and was likely the resident scholar of the Villa of the Papyri. The content is fascinating because it gives us a direct, unfiltered window into the intellectual life of the Roman elite. In this text, Philodemus discusses the nature of pleasure, music, and food. He argues against his rivals, the Stoics, debating whether things like music and luxury foods are good in themselves or only good because they are rare. He writes about the senses and how they interact with the mind. One translated passage reads, "As in the case of food, we do not immediately believe that things that are scarce are absolutely more pleasant than those that are abundant." It is a critique of luxury and a defense of finding happiness in simple things, which is the core of Epicurean philosophy. But the philosophy is almost secondary to the implication of the discovery itself. The text mentions a figure named Xenophantus, a flute player mentioned by ancient historians like Plutarch. It references other thinkers and disputes that we had lost all trace of. We are listening to a conversation that was cut off mid-sentence by a volcano. The implications for 2025 and beyond are immense. The Villa of the Papyri has not been fully excavated. Most of the site is still buried under 60 feet of rock. Archaeologists believe that the scrolls found so far were just the working library, or a small collection that was being packed up when the eruption started. The main library, which would likely contain Latin texts as well as Greek, might still be down there, sitting on its shelves. If we can find it, we now have the proven technology to read it. Think about what that means. We have lost almost all of the literature from the ancient world. We have only 7 of Sophocles' 120 plays. We have lost entire books of Roman history by Livy and Tacitus. We have lost the scientific works of the pre-Socratics and the poetry of Sappho. Until the success of the Vesuvius Challenge, we assumed those works were gone forever. But Herculaneum offers a potential solution. The carbonization that made the scrolls impossible to open also made them immune to rot. They are stable. They are waiting. The goal for 2025 is to read 90% of the 4 scanned scrolls currently in the database, effectively resurrecting lost books from the dead. Beyond Herculaneum, Dr. Seals represents a new frontier in virtual archaeology. This technology could be used on other impossible texts, medieval manuscripts recycled into book covers, brittle scrolls from the Judean desert, or ancient Egyptian cartonnage, papyrus used to wrap mummies, which often contains recycled documents and literature. The Scroll of Philodemus is just the first page of a new chapter. For 2,000 years, the eruption of Vesuvius was viewed as a tragedy that destroyed a civilization. But in a strange twist of fate, it was the volcano that saved these books for us. It locked them in a time capsule that we finally, in our time, figured out how to open. And as we move forward into the rest of the video, we will see that the surprises of 2025 were not limited to land. Some of the biggest secrets were waiting for us at the bottom of the sea. If you look out across the waters of Abu Kirbe today, just a few miles east of Alexandria, you will see nothing but the blue expanse of the Mediterranean. It is a quiet stretch of coast, battered by waves and wind. But beneath the surface, lying in the gloom of the seabed, rests one of the most legendary cities of the ancient world. Canopus was once the Las Vegas of antiquity. It was a city of contradictions, famous for its wild, decadent festivals and its deep, mystical piety. It was a place where pilgrims came to be healed by the gods and where wealthy Alexandrians came to lose themselves in pleasure. For centuries, it stood as a gateway to Egypt, a thriving port filled with temples, villas, and markets. And then, in a single cataclysmic moment in the 8th century AD, it vanished. The ground beneath it liquefied, and the entire city slid into the sea, swallowed whole by the Mediterranean. For over 1,000 years, Canopus existed only in the texts of Greek and Roman historians, a ghost story of a drowned metropolis. But in August 2025, the silt of the Nile Delta finally revealed one of its greatest secrets. A team of underwater archaeologists working as part of a long-term collaboration between the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities and the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology announced a discovery that brings the city back to life in vivid detail. During a deep-water excavation in the submerged ruins of the Temple District, divers uncovered a colossal statue that had been buried in the sediment for more than a millennium. It was a sphinx. But this was not the limestone or sandstone typically used for such monuments. This creature was carved from quartzite, one of the hardest stones in the ancient world. As the divers carefully brushed away the layers of mud and shell, the sunlight filtering down from the surface caught the stone, revealing a pristine, polished surface that had survived the salt water remarkably well. The Sphinx bears the royal cartouche of Ramses II, the most powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Its discovery in a city that reached its peak during the much later Ptolemaic period suggests it was an heirloom, a sacred ancestor brought to Canopus from an older site to lend ancient authority to a new temple. Finding a quartz statue of this size is incredibly rare. Quartzite is notoriously difficult to carve, requiring tools and skills that were lost for centuries. To find one resting on the seafloor, surrounded by the fish and the currents, is a haunting reminder of the wealth that Canopus once commanded. But the Sphinx was not alone. Alongside the Colossus, the team recovered a trove of ritual artifacts that shed new light on the city's most famous event, the mysteries of Osiris. To understand the significance of these finds, we have to understand what Canopus was to the people of the ancient world. It was the final destination of a massive, waterborne religious procession. Every year, during the month of Koyak, the priests of the neighboring port city of Thutmose Herakleion would place a statue of the god Osiris onto a sacred barge. In a grand torchlit flotilla, they would sail the statue down the canals that linked the two cities, simulating the god's journey to the underworld. When the barge arrived in Canopus, the celebration transformed. It was a festival of death and resurrection, mourning and ecstasy. The artifacts recovered this year provide the first physical evidence of the specific rituals performed inside the secrecy of the temple walls. Divers retrieved ceremonial ladles made of bronze and silver, used to pour libations of wine and water over the god's image. They found offering tables still laden with the petrified remains of offerings, and, most intriguingly, a series of Osiris beds. These were stone or gold molds shaped like the silhouette of the god. During the festival, priests would fill these molds with a mixture of soil and grain. They would water the god until the grain sprouted, creating a living, green image of Osiris. It was a powerful symbol of life rising from death, mirroring the annual flooding of the Nile that kept Egypt alive. Finding these delicate ritual objects in the chaotic wreckage of a sunken city is miraculous. It allows us to reconstruct the sensory experience of the festival. We can imagine the smell of incense heavy in the air, the sound of sistrums rattling, and the sight of thousands of pilgrims lining the canals, waiting for the god to pass. The discovery also highlights the duality of Canopus. While the priests were conducting these solemn rites in the sanctuary, the streets outside were hosting a very different kind of party. Ancient writers like Strabo described the canal to Canopus as a scene of non-stop revelry, with flute players and dancers performing on boats packed with partygoers. It was a place of excess, where the strict rules of Egyptian society were loosened. The Sphinx of Ramses II likely witnessed scenes of debauchery that would have shocked his conservative New Kingdom court. The recovery of these artifacts also forces us to confront the terrifying reality of the city's end. Canopus did not just fall into ruin, it was destroyed by a geological phenomenon known as liquefaction. The city was built on the soft, unstable clay of the Nile Delta. When a massive earthquake struck in the 8th century, the solid ground turned into a slurry. The heavy stone temples, statues, and obelisks simply sank into the mud, dragging the city down with them. The condition of the newly found Sphinx tells this story of violence. It was found toppled on its side, half buried in a layer of chaotic debris that suggests a sudden, catastrophic event. It wasn't carefully buried or dismantled. It was thrown down by the earth itself. The fact that it is so well preserved is a direct result of this disaster. The liquid mud that swallowed the city also sealed it, protecting the stone from erosion and looting. However, thanks to this new discovery, we now have the tools the priests used. We have the statues they prayed to. We have the god king Ramses, carved in eternal quartz, watching over a city that no longer exists. As the artifacts undergo desalination and restoration in the labs of Alexandria, they will eventually take their place in the Grand Egyptian Museum. But their true home will always be the twilight world of Abu Kirbeh, where the rest of Canopus still sleeps, waiting for the next dive. While archaeologists in Alexandria were uncovering sunken relics, geneticists working in the southern cone of South America were uncovering lost people. For decades, the story of how humans populated the Americas seemed relatively straightforward. We believed that after crossing the Bering Land Bridge, people spread rapidly from north to south, branching into the ancestors of the indigenous groups we know today. But in November 2025, a new study published in the journal Nature revealed that the family tree of South America is far more complex and far more tragic than we ever realized. A massive international team, led by Javier Maraval Lopez from Harvard University, analyzed the DNA of 238 ancient individuals from Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. These remains spanned a period of 10,000 years, from the earliest hunter-gatherers to the time of European contact. As they sequenced the genomes, they found something that shouldn't have been there. Hidden within the genetic code of ancient skeletons from the Pampas region of central Argentina was a distinct DNA signature that matched no known modern indigenous group. It was a ghost lineage, a branch of the human family that had split off from the main wave of migration thousands of years ago and evolved in complete isolation. To understand why this is so strange, we have to look at the geography. The Pampas is a vast, fertile grassland that stretches across central Argentina, similar to the Great Plains of North America. It is open country, easy to traverse, and rich in resources. Usually, when populations live in such an accessible landscape, they mix. People trade, marry, and migrate. Genes flow like water across the plains. But this ghost population remained separate. The data suggests this was a substantial population that thrived in these grasslands for nearly 5,000 years. They appear in the archaeological record around 8,500 years ago and persist until roughly 1,000 years ago. During that immense span of time, longer than the history of ancient Egypt, they maintained a genetic distinctiveness that is almost unheard of in human history. While civilizations rose and fell in the Andes to the west and the Amazon to the north, this group remained apart, a genetic island in a sea of movement. Archaeology gives us a glimpse into who these people were. We know from sites like Arroyo Seco, Tu, and Laguna Chica that they were highly adapted hunter-gatherers. In the early years, they lived alongside the last of the Ice Age megafauna. We have found their stone tools associated with the bones of giant ground sloths and the American horse. They crafted distinctive weapons, including the famous fishtail projectile points, and later, the tiger points found at sites like Paso Otero 4. But as the climate shifted, so did their world. Around 6,000 years ago, the region entered a period known as the mid-Holocene aridity. The climate became drier and more hostile. The megafauna vanished, and the grasslands turned brown. Many human groups in South America abandoned the dry interior during this time, retreating to the wetter coasts or the mountains. But the ghost lineage stayed. They adapted to the harsh, new reality. They shifted their diet from giant mammals to the guanaco, a wild relative of the llama, and the rhea, a large flightless bird. They developed new technologies to hunt this faster, smaller game, including the boleadoras, weighted stones connected by cords that could be thrown to entangle the legs of running animals. We find these polished stone spheres in their graves, a symbol of their survival strategy. They also buried their dead with extraordinary care. At sites in the eastern Pampas, archaeologists have found complex burials where the bones were painted with red ochre. In some cases, they practiced secondary burial, where the body was allowed to decompose before the bones were cleaned, bundled, and reburied in a communal grave. This suggests a society with deep ancestral reverence and complex rituals about the afterlife. Yet despite their resilience, they remained isolated. The genetic data shows almost zero intermarriage with the peoples of the Andes or the tropical forests to the north. For 5,000 years, they lived in a world of their own, separated from the rest of the continent, not by mountains or oceans, but by some invisible cultural or territorial barrier we still don't understand. Then, around 1,000 years ago, the signal vanishes. The genetic lineage that had defined the Pampas for millennia suddenly disappears from the record. In the centuries just before the arrival of Europeans, the population of the region changes dramatically. New genetic markers from the Andes and the Amazon begin to appear, suggesting a wave of migration or conquest that replaced or absorbed the ghost people. By the time the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, the people they encountered, the Querendí and others, were genetically different from the ancient inhabitants who had hunted the ground sloths. What happened to them? The timing coincides with the medieval warm period, a time of climate change that might have allowed expanding populations from the north to push into the grasslands. It's possible they were overwhelmed by new diseases, pushed out by more numerous invaders, or simply absorbed so completely that their genetic signal was diluted into nothingness. The disappearance of this lineage adds a haunting note to the history of the Americas. The ghost lineage represents a failed experiment in a way, a branch of the tree that flourished for thousands of years, but ultimately was pruned. Entire peoples, with their own language, songs, creation myths, and memories, vanished without leaving a trace in the history books. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what gods they worshipped. We only know they existed because of the fragments of DNA preserved in the dust of their bones. This discovery fundamentally challenges the single-wave theory of migration. It implies that the settlement of South America was a much more dynamic, braided, and sometimes violent process. There were likely multiple pulses of movement, with groups splitting, isolating, thriving, and sometimes dying out entirely. Now they have a place in the story again. They are the lost people of the Pampas, and as we continue to sequence more ancient genomes, we are likely to find more of these ghosts, lost cousins who walked the earth long before us, leaving nothing behind but their DNA. In the genealogy of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty, the golden age of the New Kingdom, there has always been a missing piece. We know the titans of this era well. We know Thutmose I, the conqueror who expanded the empire to the Euphrates. We know Hatshepsut, the woman who declared herself pharaoh and ruled with unprecedented power. And we know Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt, whose military genius cemented Egyptian dominance for a century. But trapped between these giants was a king who seemed to vanish into the background, Thutmose II. For more than a century, Egyptologists have treated him as little more than a placeholder. He was the frail husband of the ambitious Hatshepsut and the father of the mighty Thutmose III. He ruled for perhaps 15 years, but his reign has largely been defined by his relationships to the more famous figures around him. His mummy was found in 1881, part of the famous royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, where priests had hidden the bodies of great kings to protect them from looters. But unlike his father or his son, his original tomb had never been found. He was the only pharaoh of the 18th dynasty whose final resting place remained a blank spot on the map. That changed in 2025, in a discovery that has been hailed as one of the most significant since Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun. A joint Egyptian-British mission announced they had finally located the lost tomb of the missing pharaoh. Led by Dr. Piers Litherland of the New Kingdom Research Foundation, the team didn't find it in the main branch of the Valley of the Kings, where tourists flock today. They found it in the rugged, desolate cliffs of the Western Wadis, a place few visitors ever see. The archaeological detective work that led to this find was brilliant in its logic. Dr. Litherland and his team suspected that Thutmose II would not be buried alongside the later Ramesside kings in the main valley. They looked instead at the burial patterns of his family. The tombs of Thutmose III's wives had been found in the steep, treacherous ravines of the Wadi Gabanat el-Kurud. It stood to reason that the father might be near the son's family. For years, the team battled the harsh terrain, clearing tons of limestone debris and battling the extreme heat. Their perseverance paid off when they uncovered a rock-cut entrance that had been buried for millennia. It was cataloged as Tomb C4. At first, the architecture was confusing. It didn't look like the grand, sprawling hypogea of the later New Kingdom. It was simpler, a corridor descending into a burial chamber. But as they cleared the rubble, the evidence began to speak. They found fragments of plaster decoration that were unmistakably royal, depictions of the Book of the Amduat, the ancient text that guided the pharaoh's soul through the 12 hours of the night. The walls would have once been brilliant with blue inscriptions and yellow stars, a map of the underworld designed to ensure the king's resurrection. The smoking gun, however, came in the form of stone. The team recovered a collection of alabaster vessels, jars used to hold sacred oils, or perhaps the king's internal organs. When they cleaned the surface, they found the cartouche of Thutmose II. But they found something else too, a detail that changes our understanding of the power dynamics of the time. Inscribed alongside the king's name was the name of his great royal wife, Hatshepsut. This physical link, carved in stone and sealed in the darkness for 3,500 years, offers a fascinating window into their relationship. History has often painted Hatshepsut as a usurper, a stepmother who seized power from the young Thutmose III after her husband's death. But the presence of her name on the funerary equipment of Thutmose II suggests a different story. It implies a partnership, or at least a respectful transition of power. It shows Hatshepsut fulfilling her duties as the pious wife, preparing her husband for the afterlife with the finest goods the empire could provide. It suggests that her rise to power may have been less of a coup and more of a calculated evolution that began while he was still alive or immediately upon his death. The discovery of the tomb also answers the question of why it was lost for so long. The Western Wadis are prone to violent flash floods. The team found evidence that, shortly after the king was buried, a massive torrent of water and mud had crashed into the tomb. The floodwaters would have smashed the wooden furniture, scattered the gold, and filled the chambers with concrete-like debris. In a way, this disaster was a blessing in disguise. While it destroyed the organic beauty of the tomb, the linens, the wood, the flowers, it also sealed it. The hardened mud protected the remaining stone artifacts from the tomb robbers who stripped the Valley of the Kings bare at the end of the Bronze Age. While Thutmose II's mummy was removed by priests in antiquity to save it from desecration, the shell of his afterlife remained intact. Finding this tomb is the final piece of the 18th dynasty puzzle. we now have the burial locations of the entire Thutmose line. We can trace the evolution of royal tomb architecture from the simple hidden cliffs of the early dynasty to the grand complex tunnels of the later Ramesside period. Thutmose II's tomb represents a transitional moment, a link between the founding of the empire and its zenith. It also invites a re-evaluation of the king himself. We tend to judge pharaohs by the size of their monuments or the number of battles they won. Because Thutmose II had a short reign and was sandwiched between two major rulers, he is often dismissed. But the quality of the grave goods found, the fine alabaster, the evidence of elaborate wall paintings, suggests a king who commanded immense resources and respect. He was not a minor figure to his contemporaries. He was the living Horus, the ruler of the two lands. This discovery also highlights the changing nature of Egyptology. The days of finding a door, breaking the seal, and seeing lost treasures gleaming in the torchlight are mostly gone. Today, the greatest discoveries come from revisiting the empty spaces, the forgotten wadis, and the debris piles left by previous excavators. It comes from rereading the landscape with a geologist's eye, understanding where the floods went and where the cliffs might hide a secret. As the excavation continues, the team hopes to find more. The flood debris may yet hide smaller objects, Ushabti figures, jewelry, or perhaps even foundation deposits that could clarify the exact length of his reign. But even if nothing else is found, the discovery of Tomb C4 is a triumph. It restores Thutmose II to his rightful place in the landscape of Thebes. And through the debris of his tomb, we are finally beginning to see the man who stood in the shadow of a queen. As we move from the grand tombs of kings to the darker corners of the ancient world, we encounter a different kind of history. Usually, archaeology is about how people lived, what they ate, how they built their homes, and who they worshipped. But sometimes, we find evidence of something more sinister. We find evidence of what they feared. In 2025, two separate discoveries, one in the deserts of Egypt and one in a medieval graveyard in Poland, forced us to confront the visceral, human terror of death itself. The first story begins in the storerooms of the Cairo Museum. For nearly a century, curators had been puzzled by a peculiar mummy known simply as the Screaming Woman. Found in 1935 in the Deir el-Bahari cache near Luxor, she was buried beneath the tomb of Senmut, the architect of Queen Hatshepsut. But unlike the serene, composed faces of the royal mummies around her, this woman's mouth was locked open in a wide, terrifying grimace of agony. For decades, the prevailing theory was that her expression was simply a result of poor mummification. It was assumed that the embalmers had been careless, failing to secure her jaw, allowing it to fall open as the body decomposed. She was dismissed as a mistake. But this year, a team led by Dr. Sahar Salim, a professor of radiology at Cairo University, decided to investigate further. Using advanced CT scanning technology, they performed a virtual dissection of the mummy, peering beneath the wrappings without damaging them. The results, published in Frontiers in Medicine, completely overturned the careless embalmer theory. The scans revealed that the woman had been mummified with extraordinary care. Her organs were still inside her body, a rare practice, but they were preserved perfectly. Her skin had been treated with expensive imported materials, juniper resin and frankincense, likely brought from as far away as the Eastern Mediterranean or East Africa. Her hair was dyed with henna and juniper, and she wore a wig made of date palm fibers treated with quartz crystals to keep it stiff and black. This was not a cheap, hasty burial. This was an elite woman, treated with the highest respect and cost available to the 18th dynasty. So why was she screaming? Dr. Salim's analysis points to a rare and horrifying physiological phenomenon known as a cadaveric spasm. In cases of extreme violence, intense pain, or profound emotional distress at the moment of death, the muscles can seize up instantly, locking the body in its final position. Unlike rigor mortis, which sets in hours later and eventually fades. A cadaveric spasm is immediate and rigid. The implication is chilling. The screaming woman likely died in a state of sheer terror or agony so intense that her muscles froze in a scream. The embalmers, despite their skill and the expensive materials they used, were unable to close her mouth. The rigor was too strong. They had to wrap her as she was, preserving her final moment of suffering for eternity. We will likely never know exactly how she died, whether it was a heart attack, a violent assault, or a painful illness. But the CT scan has given us the closest thing to a witness statement from 3,500 years ago. While the screaming woman reveals the physical reality of a painful death, a discovery in Poland reveals the supernatural fear of what happens after death. In the village of Pien, archaeologists from Nicolaus Copernicus University have been excavating a 17th century cemetery that locals have dubbed the Field of Vampires. This was not a normal graveyard. It was a place for the socially other, people who were feared in life and terrified their neighbors in death. In late 2024 and early 2025, the team uncovered a series of burials that showed just how deep this fear ran. One skeleton, belonging to a young woman, was found with a sickle placed across her neck. The blade was not just resting there. It was positioned so that if she tried to sit up in the grave, it would decapitate her. This was a specific, calculated anti-vampire measure. In the folklore of the region, a striga or vampire was a restless spirit that could return to the world of the living to drain their blood or bring disease. The sickle was a failsafe, a physical barrier, ensuring that the dead stayed dead. But the sickle wasn't the only precaution. On the big toe of her left foot, archaeologists found a triangular iron padlock. This symbolized the closing of a stage of life, locking her to the earth so she could not return to haunt the village. Nearby, they found another grave, this one of a child, aged 5 to 7. The child had been buried face down, a practice designed to confuse the spirit so it would dig downward into the earth rather than upward toward the living. At some point after the burial, the villagers had apparently dug the body back up and removed the child's lower legs, placing a padlock under the heel. These burials date to a time of immense turmoil in Poland. The 17th century was an era of war, plague, and religious conflict. When communities are under stress, they often look for scapegoats. People who died suddenly or had physical deformities or were simply outsiders became targets for these supernatural fears. The vampires of Pien were likely just ordinary people, perhaps victims of a misunderstood disease like tuberculosis or cholera, who became monsters in the minds of their grieving neighbors. Combined, these two discoveries offer a profound look at how ancient people dealt with mortality. In Egypt, the goal was preservation, to keep the body intact, to use the finest resins and oils to ensure the soul could live forever, even if that meant preserving a scream of agony. In Poland, the goal was containment, to use iron and steel to trap the soul in the ground, protecting the living from the dead. Moving from the mystery of the screaming women, we venture to another team in Mexico who have been rewriting the history of the Pacific coast. For decades, the archaeology of Mesoamerica has been dominated by two giants, the Maya in the east and the Aztecs in the center. The vast regions in between, particularly along the rugged coast of Guerrero, were often dismissed as cultural backwaters, villages that existed on the periphery of the real civilizations. But in October 2025, that assumption was dismantled. A team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, led by archaeologist Miguel Pérez Negrete, announced the discovery of a massive, previously unknown urban center in the Costa Chica region of Guerrero. They call it Paso Temprano, though locals have long referred to the overgrown mounds as Corral de Piedra. The site is huge. It occupies more than a kilometer of crests and hills, making it one of the largest pre-Hispanic cities ever found in western Mexico. It dates to the Epiclassic period, roughly 650 to 950 AD, a time of immense upheaval following the fall of Teotihuacan. But what makes Paso Temprano revolutionary isn't just its size, it's the architecture. Unlike the square pyramids and rectangular plazas of the Maya or Aztecs, the builders of Paso Temprano were obsessed with the circle. The city is anchored by massive, round platforms, some measuring over 150 feet in diameter. These circular structures are built from river stones and packed earth, rising in tiered layers that would have supported temples or elite residences. This circular style connects the site to the Yesla Naranjo tradition, a culture that has remained largely a mystery to archaeologists. Until now, we had only found scattered evidence of their existence. Ceramics with distinct orange slips and stylized serpent iconography. Paso Temprano proves they were not just a loose collection of tribes, but a sophisticated, centralized state capable of monumental construction. The masonry at the site displays a technique researchers have dubbed paramento mixtico, characterized by upright stone blocks interspersed with thin, horizontal slabs. This distinctive style links Paso Temprano to other known ancient structures such as Tehuacalco, suggesting a shared architectural language that spanned the region. The precision of the stonework implies a highly skilled class of masons and a society that valued permanence and aesthetic order. Excavations have revealed a complex urban layout that reflects a clearly defined social hierarchy. The city climbs steep, defensible ridgelines, with lower slopes containing isolated architectural units and residential zones the team calls Pueblo Viejo. These areas retain traces of rooms, vestibules, and corridors, offering a glimpse into the daily lives of the common people. Higher up, the elite sectors feature palace-like compounds and ceremonial spaces, physically elevated above the rest of the population. Among the most notable discoveries is a massive eye-shaped ball court measuring 161 feet long. Ball courts were central to Mesoamerican life, serving as venues for a ritual game that symbolized the movement of the sun and moon. The presence of such a large court at Paso Temprano suggests that its residents participated in these cosmic ceremonies, linking them to the broader religious traditions of the continent. Near the court, archaeologists found a smooth stela that likely served as an altar, further reinforcing the site's role as a spiritual center. The city's location is equally significant. It sits at a strategic choke point between the highlands and the Pacific coast. This suggests Paso Temprano was a gatekeeper city, controlling the trade routes that moved obsidian, copper, and marine shells between the powerful empires of the interior and the coastal networks of the West. Artifacts found at the site confirm this role. Archaeologists have recovered materials that hint at long-distance connections. The Costa Chica was a vital corridor for the movement of goods like cacao, cotton, and salt. The presence of Paso Temprano suggests that a powerful, independent state controlled this flow, extracting wealth from the trade that passed through its territory. The discovery fills a massive blank spot on the archaeological map. It shows that while Teotihuacan was collapsing in the center and the Maya were warring in the jungle, a third, entirely distinct civilization was thriving on the coast, building a city of circles that has been lost for 1,200 years. The decline of Paso Temprano is still a mystery. Around 1100 AD, the city was abandoned. There are no obvious signs of violent destruction or invasion. The population simply drifted away, leaving their great stone circles to be reclaimed by the forest. It is possible that the rise of the Mixtec kingdoms to the east shifted the balance of power, or that environmental changes made the hilltop city unsustainable. Although the region was later occupied by Amuzgo and Mixtec peoples, the original builders of Paso Temprano remain a puzzle. Excavation is still in its early stages, but Paso Temprano is already forcing a rewrite of Mexican history. It reminds us that the periphery was often a center of its own. The map of ancient Mexico is not just a story of Aztecs and Maya. It is a mosaic of diverse, independent cultures that we are only just beginning to understand. As the team continues to clear the vegetation from the stone circles, They are revealing a civilization that marched to its own rhythm, building a legacy that defied the square logic of its neighbors. In the spring of 1900, a group of sponge divers from the island of Sima were blown off course by a storm. They sought shelter off the rocky coast of Antikythera, a small, desolate island between Crete and the Peloponnese. While waiting for the winds to die down, a diver named Elias Stadiatis decided to try his luck on the seabed. He descended about 150 feet into the dark blue water. Minutes later, he surfaced in a panic, babbling about a heap of rotting corpses at the bottom of the sea. He claimed he had seen men, horses, and women, their limbs twisted and their flesh decaying in the gloom. The captain, suspecting nitrogen narcosis, dove down to check. He didn't find corpses. He found statues. The rotting flesh was bronze and marble, corroded by 2,000 years of salt water. The divers had stumbled upon the richest shipwreck ever found from the ancient world. It was a Roman-era freighter, laden with a cargo of Greek art so massive that its value is incalculable even today. For more than a century, the Antikythera wreck has been the most famous underwater site on Earth. It is best known for yielding the Antikythera mechanism, a shoebox-sized lump of bronze gears that turned out to be the world's first analog computer. But in 2025, the ship proved that it still has secrets to reveal. A team of researchers from the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece, led by Professor Lorenz Baumer, returned to the site for a new excavation season. The wreck sits on a steep underwater slope, making it incredibly dangerous to excavate. Boulders weighing tons often roll down onto the artifacts, crushing them or hiding them from view. Using advanced underwater drones and divers equipped with rebreathers to extend their bottom time, the 2025 mission managed to move several of these massive rocks. Underneath, they found the cargo that had been trapped since the ship went down around 60 BC. The most striking find of the new season was a series of marble fragments belonging to a colossal statue. In 2022, the team had found a massive marble head of Hercules. This year, they found the rest of him, buried deep in the sand, protected from the eroding effects of the seawater. They uncovered the plinth and lower legs of the statue. The preservation was extraordinary. While marble exposed to the open ocean is usually eaten away by date mussels and sponges until it looks like Swiss cheese, the marble buried in the sand retains its smooth, polished surface. This discovery allows archaeologists to reconstruct the scale of the lost art. The Hercules statue was twice life-size. It was a masterpiece of the Hellenistic Baroque style, likely looted from a temple in Greece or Asia Minor to adorn the villa of a wealthy Roman senator. Finding the base in situ confirms that these statues were not just loose cargo rolling around. They were carefully packed and braced for the voyage, only to be shattered when the ship hit the rocks. But the 2025 season yielded more than just art. It revealed the ship itself. For the first time, divers recovered a substantial section of the hull that was still articulated, meaning the planks were still joined to the frame. This is a holy grail for naval archaeologists. Usually, wood rots away entirely or is found as scattered fragments. This section, preserved by a layer of clay and pottery shards, confirms that the Antikythera ship was a Titan. The hull was built using shell-first construction, a technique where the outer planks are joined together with thousands of mortise and tenon joints before the internal skeleton is added. It is a method that requires immense skill and labor, resulting in a hull that is incredibly strong but flexible. The size of the planks suggests the ship was over 130 feet long, a super freighter of its day, capable of carrying hundreds of tons of cargo. The tragedy of the Antikythera wreck is the scale of the loss. This wasn't just a merchant ship carrying wine and grain, it was a floating museum. The cargo consisted of dozens of bronze and marble statues, luxury glassware, ornate furniture, and jewelry. It was likely a convoy carrying the spoils of war or the fruits of taxation from the newly conquered Greek East to the ravenous markets of Rome. When it sank, it took with it some of the finest technology and art the world had ever seen. This brings us back to the most famous object found on the ship, The Antikythera mechanism. For decades after its discovery in 1901, the mechanism was ignored. It looked like a corroded green rock. It sat in a museum drawer until the 1950s, when a historian named Derek de Solla Price began to X-ray it. He found gears, not just simple wheels, but complex, epicyclic gear trains that wouldn't be reinvented in Europe until the 14th century AD. The mechanism was a hand-powered orrery. By turning a crank on the side, a user could track the movements of the sun, moon, and 5 known planets. It could predict eclipses decades in advance, track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and even calculate the irregular orbit of the moon. It was a machine of impossible precision. The discovery of the Hercules statue and the hull fragments in 2025 recontextualizes the mechanism. It suggests that this device wasn't a one-off prototype or a singular genius's toy. It was likely just one item in a shipment of high-end luxury goods. It implies that there was a market for such devices in Rome. Just as a wealthy Roman might buy a Greek statue for his garden, he might buy a Greek mechanical computer for his library to impress his friends. This changes how we view ancient technology. If the mechanism was a trade good, it means there were others. It means there were workshops in Rhodes or Syracuse churning out gears and dials. The fact that we have only found one is a statistical anomaly, a result of the fact that bronze is valuable and was almost always melted down and recycled in later centuries. The only reason the Antikythera mechanism survived is because it was hidden at the bottom of the sea, safe from the smelter. The 2025 excavation also recovered human remains. 2 teeth found embedded in the marine crust. This offers the possibility of DNA analysis to identify the crew. Were they Greeks, Romans, or slaves from the East? Knowing who was on board adds a human dimension to the tragedy. This was a catastrophic event, a massive ship, overloaded with heavy stone and bronze, caught in a sudden storm off a notorious cape, where the Aegean meets the Ionian Sea. It would have been smashed against the cliffs, spilling its priceless cargo into the deep. The wealth lost in that single moment is staggering. The bronze statues alone would have been worth a fortune. In the ancient world, bronze was the primary medium for high art. Today, fewer than 50 large Greek bronzes exist worldwide. The Antikythera wreck has yielded several, and the team believes there are more down there, buried under the boulders. As the team prepares for the 2026 season, the focus will remain on the area where the Hercules head was found. The hope is that the rest of his body is waiting there, perhaps alongside other masterpieces that haven't seen the sun since the days of Julius Caesar. And thanks to the persistence of archaeologists and the technology of the 21st century, we are finally bringing it back to the surface. We have known for decades that Homo sapiens did not emerge in a vacuum. Our history is shared with a complex family of other human species, from the Neanderthals of Europe to the Denisovans of Asia. But until 2025, many of these cousins remained abstract, names on a chart or ghosts in our DNA. This year, 2 major discoveries, one in the frozen north of China and one in the sun-baked caves of Spain, finally gave faces to these shadowy figures, transforming them from scientific theories into physical realities. The first discovery centers on a fossil that has traveled a remarkable journey through the 20th century. In 1933, a Chinese laborer working on a bridge in Harbin found a massive, fossilized human skull in the mud of the Songhua River. He recognized it as something significant, but he also knew that the occupying Japanese army would seize it if they found it. So, he wrapped the skull in cloth and hid it at the bottom of a well. It stayed there, submerged and secret, for nearly 90 years. Before he died, he told his family about the treasure in the well. They recovered it and eventually donated it to science. Since then, the Harbin cranium has been a subject of intense study. It is huge, larger than any modern human skull, with thick brow ridges, a wide face, and square eye sockets. It held a brain the same size as ours, but its architecture was archaic, built for a world of brutal physical demands. In 2025, a comprehensive new analysis confirmed that this is not a robust Homo sapiens or an Eastern Neanderthal. It is a distinct species which researchers have named Homo longi, or Dragon Man. The real shock came from the dating and protein analysis. Dragon Man lived at least 146,000 years ago, during a deep ice age. This places a massive, big-brained human species in one of the harshest environments on Earth. At the same time, our own ancestors were still largely confined to Africa. The physical build of Dragon Man is terrifyingly impressive. Based on the dimensions of the skull, scientists estimate these humans were extremely robust, adapted for deep cold and immense physical exertion. They didn't just survive the Siberian winters, they thrived in them. They hunted mammoths and woolly rhinos, likely lived in small, tight-knit groups, and possessed a culture and technology that allowed them to endure conditions that would challenge even modern survivalists. The study also revealed a genetic bombshell. Dragon Man is likely the species we have known for years only as the Denisovans. Until now, the Denisovans were defined almost entirely by genetics, known only from a finger bone, a few teeth, and DNA fragments found in a Siberian cave. We knew they interbred with us. We knew they gave Tibetans the gene to survive at high altitudes, but we had no idea what they actually looked like. If Dragon Man is indeed a Denisovan, the fossil record has finally caught up with the genetic record. We can now look into the face of the species that ruled Eastern Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. It is a face that is undeniably human, but distinct. A parallel evolution that mirrors our own in intelligence, but diverged in form. While Dragon Man clarifies the picture of our recent cousins, a discovery in Spain pushes the timeline of European settlement back further than we thought possible. At the Cima del Elefante site in the Atapuerca Mountains, archaeologists unearthed a fragment of a human face, a maxilla, upper jaw, and cheekbone, dating back 1.2 to 1.4 million years. This is the oldest human face ever found in Europe. For a long time, the consensus was that humans didn't reach Western Europe until much later. The continent was colder, filled with predators like saber-toothed cats and hyenas, and was thought to be a fortress that only later, more advanced humans could breach. This fossil proves that a pioneering species, likely Homo antecessor, had walked all the way to the Atlantic Ocean more than 1 million years ago. The fragment is small, but its morphology is significant. It shows a face that is surprisingly modern. Unlike the heavy, protruding faces of apes, or even some later human ancestors, this individual had a flatter, more vertical profile. It suggests that some of the facial features we consider unique to Homo sapiens actually emerged very early in our evolutionary history, appearing in these ancient pioneers long before our own species existed. Combining these two finds, Dragon Man and the Sima face, creates a much richer, more tangible picture of the past. It reinforces the fact that the world was a tapestry of different human forms. 100,000 years ago, a traveler walking from Africa to Asia would have encountered a diverse cast of characters. In Africa, they would see us. In Europe, the stocky Neanderthals. In Asia, the massive, cold-adapted dragon men. On the islands of Indonesia, the tiny Homo floresiensis. These weren't just biological curiosities. They were people. They made tools, they controlled fire, they likely had languages and names for each other. They looked at the same stars and felt the same cold. And, as DNA tells us, we didn't just avoid them. We met them, we fought them, we traded with them, and we mated with them. The tragedy is that they are all gone. We are the last ones standing. We don't know exactly why. Did we outcompete them? Did we bring diseases they couldn't fight? Or did the changing climate simply push them over the edge? Now, we are the only voice left, using our science to reconstruct the stories of the cousins who didn't make it. In the dense, green heart of the Petén jungle, archaeologists have spent decades peeling back the layers of Maya history. We have mapped the great classic period cities like Tikal and Calakmul, marveling at their towering pyramids and complex dynastic wars. But for a long time, the era before these giants, the pre-classic period, remained shadowy. We assumed it was a time of smaller villages and simpler structures, a warm-up act for the main event that would come 1,000 years later. But in May 2025, a joint team of Guatemalan and Slovak archaeologists announced a discovery that shattered that timeline completely. Working deep in the unexplored forests of northern Guatemala, just 13 miles from the famous ruins of Huaxactún, the team uncovered a massive, integrated urban complex that dates back nearly 3,000 years. This places it squarely in the middle pre-classic period, around 800 BC, a time when, according to the old textbooks, the Maya were just beginning to organize. The complex consists of 3 distinct cities, Los Abuelos, Petnal, and Cambreal, that formed a previously unknown urban triangle of immense power and sophistication. The scale of the construction is staggering. At Los Abuelos, the team found a ceremonial center covering 6 square miles, anchored by pyramids and sanctuaries that rival the later classic sites in size. One pyramid at Petnal stands over 100 feet tall, crowned with preserved chambers that still bear the traces of red, white, and black murals painted 3 millennia ago. But the true revolution of this discovery isn't the height of the temples. It is the water. At the site of Cambreal, the archaeologists found something they had never seen before in the pre-classic record, a sophisticated, stucco-lined canal system. This wasn't just a simple drainage ditch. It was a feat of hydraulic engineering that suggests a complete mastery of the rainforest environment 1,000 years earlier than anyone expected. The canal network runs for nearly 200 feet, extending from a massive reservoir atop a palace structure down through the facade of the city. The channels were lined with plaster to prevent erosion and seepage, a technique that requires the production of massive amounts of lime, a resource-intensive industrial process. The system appears to have been designed to manage waste and drainage, keeping the elite precincts of the city clean and sanitary during the torrential rainy seasons. This discovery fundamentally changes our understanding of Maya urbanism. Managing water in the Petén is a matter of life and death. The region is a seasonal desert. It floods for 6 months and dries out completely for the other 6. To build a city here, you have to be able to capture the rain when it falls and store it for the dry months, while also preventing your buildings from being washed away by the deluge. Until now, we thought the complex hydraulic systems, the reservoirs, the dams, the filtration beds, were innovations of the classic period, developed as populations exploded in the first millennium AD. But the canals of Cambreal proved that the Maya had cracked this code by 800 BC. They were terraforming their environment and managing complex infrastructure at a time when Rome was just a collection of mud huts on a hill. The cultural richness of the site matches its engineering. At Los Abuelos, the team found 2 anthropomorphic sculptures depicting an ancestral couple, a man and a woman carved in stone. These figures likely represent the founding lineage of the city, evidence of an ancestor worship cult that would become the bedrock of Maya religion for the next 2,000 years. They also uncovered an E-group astronomical complex, a specific arrangement of temples used to track the solstices and equinoxes. The presence of this observatory at such an early date confirms that the Maya had already formalized their calendar and their relationship with the cosmos. They were not just farmers looking at the sky. They were astronomers building giant stone machines to measure time. The sheer density of these sites, connected by causeways and sharing a unified architectural style, suggests a level of political centralization that we didn't think existed in the pre-classic. These weren't isolated independent villages. They were part of a state. The urban triangle of Los Abuelos, Petnal, and Cambreal functioned as a single economic and political engine, controlling trade and religion in the northern Petén. This discovery forces us to rethink the trajectory of civilization in the Americas. It suggests that the classic Maya didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were the inheritors of a deep, sophisticated tradition of engineering and urban planning that stretched back into the mists of the first millennium BC. The jungle of Guatemala is often called a green ocean, a vast expanse that swallows history. But thanks to this new expedition, we now know that this ocean hides leviathans. The builders of Cambreal and Los Abuelos were not primitive ancestors. They were master engineers who tamed the rainforest long before history gave them credit for it. As the team continues to map the canals and clear the temples, they are revealing the blueprint of a civilization that was fully formed, powerful, and brilliant, right at the very beginning of its story. In November 2025, archaeologists from the Budapest History Museum made a discovery that offered a rare, unfiltered look into the past. While excavating a site in the Óbuda district of Budapest, they uncovered a limestone sarcophagus dating back to the 3rd century AD. This area was once part of Aquincum, a major Roman settlement and military outpost on the Danube frontier. The city served as the capital of the province of Pannonia Inferior, a critical defense line against the barbarian tribes to the north. What made this find exceptional was its condition. Most Roman sarcophagi found in this region were looted centuries ago, their lids pried open by grave robbers seeking gold or precious metals. But this tomb was completely intact. The heavy stone lid was still firmly in place, secured by iron clamps that had rusted but not broken. More importantly, the seam between the lid and the base was sealed with a thick layer of lead, creating a hermetic environment that had protected the interior for over 1,700 years. The excavation team, led by archaeologists Gabriela Fenyes and Gergely Kostiel, realized they had found a time capsule. The lead seal had prevented water, air, and insects from entering the coffin, slowing the decay of organic materials that usually disintegrate within decades. When they carefully lifted the lid, they were met with a sight that had not been seen since the funeral took place in the late Roman period. Inside lay the complete skeleton of a young woman. Based on the size of the bones and the grave goods, she was likely a member of the wealthy elite who lived in the civilian town that grew up around the legionary fortress. The preservation inside the sarcophagus was remarkable. A layer of mud had settled at the bottom, likely from groundwater seeping through microscopic cracks over millennia, but the objects placed around the body were undisturbed. Resting near her head were 2 glass vessels, known as unguentaria. In most excavations, Roman glass is found shattered into thousands of iridescent shards, crushed by the weight of the earth. These were perfectly intact. They were likely used to hold perfumed oils or balms, part of the Roman funerary ritual, where the deceased was anointed before burial. The fact that they survived unbroken suggests the coffin was handled with extreme care during the interment. Around the woman's neck and wrists, the team found gold jewelry. This included a necklace and bracelets that would have been fashionable in the 3rd century, signaling her high status. Near her skull, they discovered a bone hairpin, an item used to secure the elaborate hairstyles worn by Roman women of the period. These personal items suggest she was dressed in her finest attire for burial, intended to enter the afterlife, maintaining her social standing. The most scientifically significant find, however, was the trace evidence of textiles. The lead seal had created an environment where fragments of fabric could survive. Archaeologists identified threads of gold woven into a material that had otherwise disintegrated. This indicates she was buried in a garment of immense value, likely a silk or fine wool tunic embroidered with gold. Such clothing would have been an extreme luxury in a frontier province, imported at great cost from the eastern Mediterranean or even China via the Silk Road. The sarcophagus itself tells a story about the economy of a quincum. It was carved from local limestone, but the workmanship was high quality. The fact that her family could afford a custom-made stone coffin rather than reusing an older one, a common practice in the resource-scarce 4th century, indicates significant wealth. The lead ceiling was an additional expense, a deliberate effort to protect the body from the elements. A quincum in the 3rd and 4th centuries was a place of contrast. It was a thriving city with amphitheaters, baths, and underfloor heating systems, enjoying the comforts of Roman civilization. Yet it was also a militarized zone, constantly under threat from the Quadi and Sarmatian tribes just across the river. The presence of such a wealthy burial suggests that despite the looming instability, the elite class maintained a high standard of living and adhered strictly to traditional Roman burial customs. The team also recovered 140 bronze coins from the sarcophagus. This is a crucial detail for dating the burial. In Roman tradition, a coin was often placed in the mouth of the deceased as payment to Charon, the ferryman who carried souls across the river Styx. The sheer number of coins here is unusual and may represent a purse buried with her, or a specific local variation of the ritual intended to ensure her safe passage to the underworld. The bones are now undergoing comprehensive analysis. Osteologists will examine them to determine her exact age, height, and cause of death. Isotope analysis of her teeth will reveal where she grew up, whether she was a local Pannonian native who married into the Roman administration, or an immigrant from Italy, Gaul, or Syria, who traveled across the empire's vast road network to end her days on the Danube. Residue analysis on the glass vessels could identify the specific oils used in her funeral. We might learn if she was anointed with frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Africa, or rose oil from the gardens of Italy. These chemical signatures will help reconstruct the sensory experience of a Roman funeral, adding a layer of detail that texts and statues cannot provide. This discovery stands out in a year of massive archaeological finds because of its intimacy. While LiDAR maps show us the scale of civilizations, a sealed sarcophagus shows us the individual. It provides a snapshot of a specific moment in time, a funeral held on a frontier edge of the empire, preserved by the durability of stone and lead. As the artifacts are conserved and studied, they will be added to the collection of the Quincum Museum, offering a tangible link to the people who once walked the streets of Budapest when it was a Roman town. For most of modern history, we have viewed the Aegean Sea as a natural barrier. Looking at a map today, we see a fractured landscape of hundreds of islands separating the landmass of Anatolia from the continent of Europe. We assumed that for early humans, this water was an obstacle that could only be crossed with boats. This assumption created a major gap in our understanding of human migration. We knew humans left Africa and eventually reached Europe, but the route has always been debated. Did they go north around the Black Sea? Did they develop seafaring capabilities far earlier than we thought? In October 2025, a team of researchers from Hacettepe University and Ankara University published findings that fundamentally changed this map. Led by Dr. Göknur Karahan, the team conducted a massive survey along the coast of the Ayvalık district in northwestern Turkey. They weren't looking for shipwrecks. They were looking for evidence that the sea wasn't always there. What they found has rewritten the story of how humans entered Europe. Scattered across 10 different sites along the coast, the team recovered a collection of 138 stone tools. These weren't simple pebbles. They were sophisticated hand axes, cleavers, and chopping tools. The design of these tools was unmistakable. They displayed the characteristics of the Levallois technique. This is a specific method of stone knapping, where a core is carefully prepared to strike off a perfect flake. It is a technology associated with the Middle Paleolithic period, roughly 300,000 to 50,000 years ago. This places the artifacts squarely in the time of the Neanderthals and the very earliest waves of Homo sapiens. The presence of these tools in this specific location confirms a geological theory that has been debated for decades. During the Pleistocene era, the world was in the grip of the last ice age. Massive amounts of the planet's water were locked up in polar ice caps and glaciers. Global sea levels were significantly lower than they are today. In some periods, they were more than 300 feet lower. When you lower the Aegean Sea by 300 feet, the map changes completely. The shallow waters between Turkey and Greece disappear. The islands of Lesbos, Chios, and Samos stop being islands. They become the tops of mountains, rising out of a vast, grassy plain. The discovery at Ayvalık proves that this wasn't just a geological possibility. It was a human reality. The land bridge was open, and people were using it. This changes the migration narrative from a maritime story to a pedestrian one. Early humans didn't need to invent boats to get to Europe. They just needed to walk. The Aegean wasn't a barrier. It was a superhighway. It was a broad, fertile corridor connecting the Near East to the Balkans. We can now reconstruct what this lost landscape looked like. It wasn't a desolate land bridge like the one across the Bering Strait. Paleo-environmental data suggests it was a rich savanna environment. It was watered by large river systems that flowed out across the exposed continental shelf before reaching the receded sea. This terrain would have supported massive herds of game. We know from fossil finds on the Greek islands that this region was home to pygmy elephants, giant deer, and hippopotamuses. These animals would have migrated back and forth between Asia and Europe, grazing on the Aegean plain. The predators, including lions and early humans, simply followed the herds. The tools found by Dr. Carahan's team suggest a long-term occupation. These weren't just travelers passing through in a hurry. The density of the finds suggests that people lived here. They set up camps, sourced raw materials from the local riverbeds, and manufactured tools to butcher the animals they hunted. The Aegean land bridge was a habitat in its own right. This discovery solves a major logistical problem in archaeology. For years, we have found sites in Greece that seem too old to be explained by boat migration. We have stone tools on Crete and Naxos that date back hundreds of thousands of years. If you assume the sea was always there, these sites are baffling. They imply a level of maritime technology that doesn't match the rest of the archaeological record. But if you accept the land bridge, the mystery vanishes. The people who left those tools didn't sail to Crete, they walked there. They were living on the coastal plains, and the highlands of what are now islands were simply the hills overlooking their hunting grounds. The implications for human evolution are significant. It means that Anatolia and Europe were not separate biological zones. They were a single continuous territory for much of the Pleistocene. Genetic exchange between populations in the Near East and Europe would have been constant rather than sporadic. The findings at Ayvalık are likely just the edge of a much larger archaeological field. The tools were found in the intertidal zone and along the modern coast. This is the very fringe of the lost landscape. The heart of this Paleolithic territory is still underwater. Most of the camps, the butchery sites, and the rock shelters would have been located on the valley floors near the ancient rivers. Today, those valleys are deep beneath the Aegean Sea. We are only finding the artifacts that were left on the high ground, on the ridges that remained above water when the ice melted. This adds a layer of tragedy to the discovery. We can confirm the existence of this lost world, but we can likely never excavate it fully. The rise of sea levels at the end of the Ice Age was a slow catastrophe for the people living there. As the glaciers melted around 12,000 years ago, the water began to return. The grassy plains were flooded. The river valleys turned into bays. The hills turned into islands. The people who had lived there for thousands of years were forced to retreat to the higher ground of the mainlands or were cut off on the newly formed islands. The stone tools found this year are the survivors of that inundation. They are durable evidence of a time when the geography of the world was fundamentally different. This discovery also forces us to reevaluate our search strategies. Archaeologists have traditionally focused on caves and river terraces on the mainland. But if the primary route into Europe was the Aegean plain, we have been looking in the margins. The main story of human migration happened on land that no longer exists. Dr. Carahan and her team plan to expand their survey further inland and deeper into the shallow waters. They are looking for more evidence of the specific tool-making traditions used by these pioneers. The Aegean land bridge was not just a shortcut, it was a home. It was a landscape that supported human life for millennia. And so, in 2025, we finally found the footprints of the first Europeans. They weren't on the beaches of Greece or the mountains of Bulgaria. They were on a lost plain that connected two worlds. It proves that the separation between East and West is a modern accident of geology. In the deep past, there was no water to divide us. There was only the open horizon and the herds moving north. While divers were exploring the depths of the Mediterranean and archaeologists were mapping the jungles of Guatemala, another team was making a discovery in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, the Judean desert. This is a landscape of stark, brutal beauty. It is a region of deep canyons, crumbling limestone cliffs, and relentless sun. For thousands of years, it has served as a refuge for rebels, hermits, and outlaws. It is where David hid from King Saul, where the Zealots made their last stand at Masada, and where the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden, tucked away in caves to protect them from the Roman legions. Because of this history, archaeologists have been combing the desert for decades, searching for more scrolls before looters can find them. The assumption has always been that the desert's secrets are hidden inside the earth, in the caves and crevasses that honeycomb the cliffs. But in March 2025, a team led by the Israel Antiquities Authority found something they weren't looking for. They found a secret built on the earth, high in the cliffs, in an area that is nearly impossible to reach without climbing gear. They discovered a structure that defied explanation. It wasn't a natural cave or a simple hermit's cell. It was a constructed monument, a small step-sided pyramid built directly into the rock face. The pyramid stands about 10 feet high and is constructed from local limestone blocks, carefully cut and fitted together. It is not a tomb in the Egyptian sense, nor is it a massive monument like Giza. It appears to be a nefesh, a memorial marker, traditionally placed over a grave or used to commemorate a significant event in Second Temple period architecture. We see similar structures in the Kidron Valley of Jerusalem, such as the tomb of Zechariah. But finding one here, in the middle of a sheer cliff, miles from the nearest ancient settlement or road, was baffling. It implied a level of effort and resources that didn't match the remote location. Who would haul cut stone up a cliff face to build a monument that no one would ever see? When the team excavated the base of the structure, the mystery deepened. They didn't find a body, they found a cache. Hidden within the stonework, tucked into a deliberate hollow behind the facade, was a collection of artifacts dating back to the Ptolemaic period, roughly the 3rd century BC. This was a time of immense geopolitical tension. Following the death of Alexander the Great, his empire had fractured. The Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria fought a series of brutal wars, the Syrian Wars, for control of the Levant. Judea was the buffer zone, a land constantly marched over by rival armies. The cache included a hoard of silver tetradrachms, coins minted in Alexandria and Tyre. These were high-value currency, enough to pay a significant number of soldiers for months. The coins were in pristine condition, suggesting they had been minted, transported, and hidden without ever circulating in the local economy. Alongside the silver, they found weapons, iron spearheads, arrowheads, and the remains of a composite bow, preserved by the extreme aridity of the desert. These were not ceremonial items, they were tools of war, well used and lethal. But the most valuable find was, as always in this region, the paper. Tucked inside a sealed ceramic jar, the team found a bundle of papyrus documents. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are primarily religious texts, biblical books, commentaries, and sectarian rules, these appear to be administrative and military records. They are written in Greek and Aramaic, the languages of the administration, and the common people. Initial translations suggest that these are the records of a military garrison, perhaps a secret outpost or a rebel stronghold. The documents detail supply lines, troop movements, and payments to mercenaries. They mention names of commanders and units that do not appear in any other historical record. They speak of the fortress of the cliff and the watchers of the salt sea. This discovery forces us to rethink the history of the Judean desert. We often view it as an empty wasteland, a negative space on the map where people only went to hide or pray. But the pyramid and the cache suggest it was an active, militarized frontier. The structure may have served as a watchtower or a signaling post, part of a lost network of fortifications designed to control the trade routes that passed through the Dead Sea Valley. The pyramid shape might not have been a tomb at all, but a distinct architectural marker used by a specific military unit or elite guard to mark their territory. A symbol of authority visible only to those who knew where to look. The presence of the Ptolemaic-era weaponry is particularly telling. This was a period when the Jewish population was caught between the great powers. The cache might represent the supplies of a Jewish unit fighting as mercenaries for the Ptolemies, or perhaps a local resistance group stockpiling weapons for a revolt that history has forgotten. The composite bow is a rare find. These complex weapons, made of wood, horn, and sinew, usually disintegrate. Its preservation here allows archaeologists to study the military technology of the Hellenistic East in unprecedented detail. Why was the cache abandoned? The coins were never spent, the weapons were never retrieved, and the documents were never archived in a city. This implies a sudden, violent end. Perhaps the garrison was overrun by a Seleucid army pushing south. Perhaps they fled into the deeper desert to escape a purge, hiding their treasury and their records in the hope of returning one day. They never did. The silence of the cache speaks to a disaster that wiped out the only people who knew it existed. The artifacts are now being conserved in Jerusalem, where the papyri will be subjected to multispectral imaging to read the faded ink. This technology can reveal text that is invisible to the naked eye, potentially recovering names, dates, and orders that have been lost for 2,300 years. As we decipher these texts, we may finally learn the name of the commander who stood watch over this desolate canyon. As we continue our journey through the discoveries of 2025, we leave the dry heat of the desert and head north to the cold waters of the English Channel, where another mystery, this one made of bronze, has finally been solved. As the desert sands shift once again, we venture a remarkable discovery made by the French Navy while scanning the bottom of the sea. In March 2025, during a routine seabed survey off the coast of Ramatuelle in southern France, their sonar picked up an anomaly. They were operating in the abyss at a depth of nearly 8,400 feet, over a mile and a half down. At this depth, the Mediterranean is a world of total darkness, crushing pressure, and near-freezing temperatures. It is an environment where biology slows down and history stands still. The Navy deployed an autonomous underwater vehicle, the Hugin, to investigate the contact. As the drone glided through the black water, its lights revealed something that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a rock formation or a modern container lost from a cargo ship. It was a wooden vessel, sitting upright on the sediment as if it were still sailing across the ocean floor. This is the wreck, now known as Camarat 4. It is a merchant ship from the 16th century, and it is the deepest shipwreck ever discovered in French territorial waters. Finding a wooden ship at this depth is rare. In shallower waters, wood is quickly devoured by shipworms and destroyed by storms or fishing trawlers. But in the deep abyss, the oxygen levels are lower and the wood-boring organisms are less active. The ship has been preserved in a state of suspended animation for 500 years. The images returned by the AUV are haunting. The hull is largely intact, its ribs and planking clearly visible against the mud. The masts have collapsed, likely snapped during the ship's violent descent or eaten away by bacteria over the centuries, but the main structure remains coherent. We are looking at a time capsule from the Renaissance, a vessel that sailed the same seas as the fleets of Suleiman the Magnificent and the navies of Spain and Venice. The 16th century was a pivotal era for maritime trade. The Mediterranean was no longer the center of the world. The Atlantic routes to the Americas and the route around Africa to India were opening up. But it was still a bustling highway of commerce. Ships like Camarat IV were the workhorses of this economy, moving grain, wine, oil, and textiles between the ports of France, Italy, Spain, and the Ottoman Empire. Preliminary analysis of the wreck suggests it was a medium-sized merchantman, perhaps 60 to 80 feet long. Its location off the coast of Ramatuelle places it on a major trade route that hugged the southern coast of France, linking the ports of Marseille and Toulon with Genoa and Naples. The fact that it sank so far offshore, in such deep water, suggests it may have been blown off course by a sudden Mistral storm, the violent wind that sweeps down from the Alps and turns the Mediterranean into a cauldron. The true value of Camarat IV lies in its cargo. Because the ship sits so deep, it has never been looted. It is pristine. For archaeologists, this is the equivalent of finding an unrobbed tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The cargo hold is likely still packed with the goods it was carrying when it went down. Based on other wrecks from the period, we can speculate on what might be inside. It could be carrying amphorae of wine or oil, bales of raw silk or wool, ingots of metal, or crates of fine ceramics. It might even hold the personal possessions of the crew, their tools, their weapons, their coins, and the simple clay pipes they smoked. These everyday objects are often lost in shallow water wrecks, scattered by the waves or stolen by divers. Here, they will be exactly where they fell 5 centuries ago. The depth, however, presents a massive challenge. At 8,400 feet, human divers are impossible. Excavation must be conducted entirely by robots. This requires technology usually reserved for oil exploration or deep-sea mining. The French Department of Underwater Archaeological Research is currently planning a mission to survey the site with remotely operated vehicles capable of delicate manipulation. The goal is not to raise the ship, the wood is too fragile and the cost would be astronomical, but to map it in high resolution and sample the cargo. By retrieving specific artifacts, archaeologists can identify the ship's origin, its destination, and the date of its sinking. A single coin or a maker's mark on a piece of pottery could pin the wreck to a specific year. Camarat IV offers a unique opportunity to study the middle class of maritime history. We have plenty of information about the great warships and the royal galleys of the 16th century. We know less about the anonymous merchant vessels that kept the economy running. This ship was likely a private enterprise, owned by a merchant family or a consortium of investors. Its loss would have been a financial disaster for someone in Marseille or Genoa. For now, the ship remains where it landed 500 years ago, a ghost ship in the dark. But thanks to the sensors of the French Navy, it is no longer lost. It is a new coordinate on the map of history, a sealed archive of the Renaissance that is about to be opened. As we leave the crushing depths of the Mediterranean, we travel west to the Atlantic coast of Spain, where another discovery, this one on dry land, has finally given a face to a civilization that was once thought to be a myth. For centuries, historians have searched for the truth behind the legend of Tartessos. Located in what is now southern Spain, this civilization was the first powerful state in the western Mediterranean. The ancient Greeks wrote of it with awe. Herodotus described it as a kingdom of immense wealth, a place where silver was so common that ships used it for their anchors. It was a vital trading partner that connected the Atlantic world to the civilizations of the Near East. Yet despite its fame in antiquity, Tartessos has always been a ghost. It vanished from the historical record around 2,500 years ago, disappearing so completely that some scholars suggested it was the inspiration for Plato's Atlantis. For archaeologists, the frustration was not just that the cities were missing, it was that the people were invisible. Until this year, it was a widely accepted fact that the Tartessian culture was aniconic. This means they did not represent their gods or their people in human form. While their neighbors, the Phoenicians and the Greeks, carved statues and painted faces, the Tartessians seemingly represented the divine through abstract stones or sacred geometry. We had their jewelry and their weapons, but we had no idea what they looked like. In 2025, that silence was broken. Excavations at the site of Casas del Turunuelo in the province of Badajoz revealed the first sculpted human faces of the Tartessos culture. The discovery was made by a team from the Spanish National Research Council, led by archaeologists Esther Rodriguez and Sebastian Celestino. They were excavating the ruins of a massive two-story adobe building that served as a sanctuary or a palace. Buried in the debris of the site's final destruction, they found 5 stone busts. These were not crude or stylized effigies. They were sophisticated, naturalistic portraits carved with a skill that rivals the best art of Greece or Etruria. The shock of the discovery was immediate. The aniconic theory, which had defined Tartessian studies for decades, was instantly disproven. 2 of the busts depict women. They are adorned with elaborate, oversized earrings known as aracadas. These intricate gold pieces are well known to archaeologists, as they have been found in Tartessian hoards before. But seeing them carved on a statue places them in context. It shows how they were worn and signifies the immense status of the women depicted. These were likely representations of powerful female divinities, perhaps a local version of Astarte, or high-ranking aristocrats who served the cult. A third bust depicts a warrior. He wears a helmet with a distinct crest, a piece of military equipment that matches bronze fragments found in other parts of the region. The level of detail is extraordinary. You can see the texture of the hair and the specific cut of the garments. These statues prove that the Tartessians had a highly developed tradition of stone sculpture that had simply been erased from the record until now. The location of the find adds a layer of darkness to the discovery. Casas del Turunuelo was not abandoned gradually. It was the site of a massive, deliberate, ritual destruction. In the courtyard of the building, archaeologists found the remains of a hecatomb, a mass sacrifice of animals. More than 50 horses, cows, pigs, and dogs were slaughtered in a single event. The skeletons were found arranged on the floor of the courtyard, some still in pairs. This was a costly sacrifice. Horses were valuable assets, the Ferraris of the ancient world. To kill so many of them at once implies a ritual of supreme importance. After the sacrifice, the entire building was set on fire and then deliberately buried under layers of clay. This act of ritual closure sealed the site perfectly. It created an oxygen-free environment that preserved the plaster on the walls, the bones of the animals, and the stone faces of the gods. The discovery of the faces forces a re-evaluation of the relationship between Tartessos and the wider world. The artistic style shows a clear influence from the Eastern Mediterranean. The almond-shaped eyes and the styling of the hair recall the art of Phoenicia and archaic Greece. It confirms that Tartessos was not an isolated backwater. It was a cosmopolitan hub where local Iberian traditions blended with the aesthetics of the East. But the faces also possess a unique local character. The heavy jewelry and the specific physiognomy do not look strictly Greek or Phoenician. They look indigenous. We are finally seeing the people of the Atlantic Bronze Age. This brings us back to the Atlantis connection. While serious archaeologists avoid suggesting the Atlantis collection, the parallels between Tartessos and Plato's myth have always been difficult to ignore. Both were wealthy civilizations located beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. Both were rich in metals. And both disappeared suddenly. The excavation at Turunuelo suggests that the end of Tartessos was violent and possibly self-inflicted. The ritual destruction of the sanctuary implies a society in crisis. Perhaps they were facing an invasion, a plague, or a climate catastrophe that ruined their economy. the decision to kill their most valuable animals, burn their temples, and bury their gods suggests a desperate attempt to appease the divine, or a scorched earth policy to prevent desecration by enemies. The 5 faces found this year are likely just the beginning. The site of Casas del Turunuelo is massive, and only a fraction of it has been excavated. The team believes that the building they are uncovering is just one part of a larger complex that may represent the political center of the region. As the statues undergo restoration in the Archaeological Museum of Badajoz, a civilization that was considered faceless for 2,000 years has finally revealed itself. It turns out they were there all along, buried beneath the clay of the Spanish plains, waiting for us to dig deep enough to meet them. Sometimes, the most frustrating discoveries in archaeology aren't the ones we can't find, but the ones we find, hold in our hands, and still cannot understand. In 2025, a volunteer archaeology group in the small village of Norton Disney in Lincolnshire, England, unearthed an object that has become the ultimate black box of the Roman world. They were excavating a trench in a muddy field, looking for pottery shards and coins, when one of the volunteers struck something hard. It wasn't a stone, it was metal. As they carefully brushed away the soil, a shape emerged that looked like something from science fiction: a Roman dodecahedron. A dodecahedron is a geometric shape with 12 pentagonal faces. This particular object is made of a copper alloy, roughly the size of a grapefruit. Each of its 12 faces has a circular hole of a different diameter, and each corner is studded with a small ball-shaped knob. It is hollow, complex, and beautifully crafted. The Norton Disney example is significant because of its size and condition. It is one of the largest ever found in Britain, and it is perfectly preserved, with no damage or corrosion obscuring its details. It looks as if it could have been cast yesterday. But the real story isn't the object itself. It's the unanswered questions that surround it. This is not the first dodecahedron we have found. There are roughly 130 known examples from across the Roman Empire, mostly concentrated in the northwestern provinces of Gaul, Germany, and Britain. They have been found in military camps, in temples, in hoards of coins, and in riverbeds. And yet, in the entire corpus of Roman literature, in all the millions of words written by historians, engineers, soldiers, and poets, there is not a single mention of them. We don't know what they were named, and we don't know what they were for. The Norton Disney find has reignited a debate that has raged for 2 centuries. What is this thing? The theories range from the practical to the mystical, and every single one of them has a fatal flaw. One theory is that it was a rangefinder, or a measuring device for the Roman army, but the holes on the dodecahedrons are not standardized. Every object is different, meaning a measuring tool that gives you a different answer depending on which one you pick up is useless. Another theory suggests it was a gauge for calibrating water pipes, or coins, but again, the lack of standardization kills this idea. Roman engineering was obsessed with precision, and they wouldn't use a tool that varied so wildly. Some have suggested it was a knitting spool for making gloves, with the yarn wrapped around the knobs. While modern knitters have proven this is technically possible, it seems unlikely that such a complex, high-status bronze object would be created for such a mundane task, especially when simple wood would do. The discovery context at Norton Disney offers a new clue. The object was found in a pit filled with Roman pottery dating to the 3rd or 4th century AD. But it wasn't just thrown away. It appeared to be deliberately placed. This has led archaeologists to lean toward the theory that it was a religious or ritual object. In the Roman world, especially in the provinces where Celtic and Roman traditions mixed, magic and superstition were part of daily life. The dodecahedrons might have been fortune-telling devices, used to cast lots or determine the future based on which face landed upward. The 12 sides could correspond to the signs of the zodiac, though none of the objects bear zodiac symbols. Or perhaps they were simply masterpieces, objects created by metalworkers to demonstrate their skill, a kind of portfolio piece to show they could cast complex geometric shapes. But if that were the case, why bury them in pits? The Norton-Disney dodecahedron underwent X-ray fluorescence analysis in 2025, which showed a composition of 75% copper, 7% tin, and 18% lead. This is a standard Roman bronze mix, but the high lead content would have made the molten metal flow more easily, essential for filling the intricate mold. The craftsmanship is undeniable. It was an expensive object, valuable for its metal alone. The fact that the owner chose to bury it, rather than melt it down, suggests it held a power or significance that outweighed its scrap value. The object is currently the centerpiece of an exhibition at the University of Nottingham, where crowds have flocked to see it. There is something deeply compelling about an object that refuses to speak. We live in an age where we expect answers. We can sequence the DNA of a ghost lineage and map a city under the jungle, but we cannot figure out what this lump of bronze was for. It reminds us that for all our technology, the past is still a foreign country. There are cultural concepts, rituals, and tools that have vanished so completely that we don't even have the language to describe them. The dodecahedron sits in its glass case, a perfect geometric riddle, challenging us to admit that there are some things we just don't know. Was it a weapon, a toy, a sacred relic, or something so common and obvious to a Roman that they never bothered to write it down, like a doorknob or a buckle? Until we find one with an instruction manual or a painting of someone holding it, the Norton-Disney dodecahedron will remain the ultimate black box of archaeology. It is a beautiful, frustrating symbol of the limits of our knowledge. We often call the vast majority of human history the Stone Age. This label is a survival bias. Stone is durable. It survives the wind and the rain and the crushing weight of sediment for millions of years. But the reality of our ancestors was likely far more diverse. They lived in a world of wood, leather, fiber, and bone. Because these organic materials rot away, we are often left with a skewed picture of the past where early humans appear primitive and limited to banging rocks together. In 2025, two major discoveries on two different continents forced us to rethink the sophistication of the ancient mind. One find in Tanzania pushed the timeline of complex tool manufacturing back by hundreds of thousands of years. The other in New Mexico challenged our understanding of how the first Americans settled a changing landscape. Both discoveries prove that intelligence and innovation run much deeper in our history than the stone record suggests. The first discovery comes from the cradle of humanity in East Africa. In a study published in the journal Nature, a team of paleoanthropologists announced the identification of the oldest human-crafted bone tools on record. These artifacts were found in the fossil beds of Tanzania and date back an astounding 1.5 million years. This date is significant because it places the tools firmly in the era of Homo erectus and potentially Paranthropus boisei. These were not modern humans. They were early hominids with brains significantly smaller than ours. Yet the analysis of these bone fragments reveals a level of intentionality and understanding of materials that is shockingly modern. Working bone is fundamentally different from napping stone. Stone is isotropic, which means it breaks in predictable conchoidal fractures regardless of the direction of force. Bone is anisotropic. It has a grain. It has density variations between the hard outer cortical bone and the spongy interior. To shape it requires a completely different set of motor skills and a sophisticated understanding of the material's structural properties. The tools described in the 2025 study were not just shattered fragments used as convenient scrapers. They were shaped. The makers selected specific bones from large mammals and used stone tools to strip the flesh and periosteum. They then ground the bone against abrasive rocks to create specific shapes, including barbed points and smooth spatulas. The existence of barbed points at 1.5 million years ago is particularly revolutionary. It suggests the development of complex projectile technology far earlier than previously believed. A barbed point is designed to stay in the wound. It implies a specific hunting strategy, likely targeting fish or small game, where retaining the prey is as important as killing it. This contradicts the old view of Homo erectus as a simple scavenger who relied on brute force and luck. It paints a picture of a species that was engineering solutions to specific problems using the best materials available. The study also utilized microscopic wear analysis to determine how the tools were used. The patterns of striations on the bone surfaces suggest they were used for a variety of tasks, including digging for tubers and processing plant materials. This indicates a broad and adaptable toolkit. These early ancestors were not just surviving. They were maximizing the efficiency of their environment by turning the remains of their prey into the technology needed to acquire their next meal. While the finds in Tanzania illuminate the deep time of human engineering, a discovery in the American Southwest has shed new light on how humans mastered the New World. For decades, the archaeology of North America was dominated by the Clovis First model, which suggested humans arrived around 13,000 years ago. That model has been shattered in recent years by sites like White Sands, where human footprints were dated to 23,000 years ago. But while we knew people were there, we knew very little about how they lived. In 2025, archaeologists working at the Gypsum Overlook site in the Tularosa Basin of New Mexico announced the discovery of the oldest dated structures in the American Southwest. The site dates to 8,800 years ago, placing it in the early Archaic period. This was a time of massive environmental transition. The Ice Age was over. The megafauna were gone. The lush wetlands of the Tularosa Basin were beginning to dry out and turn into the dune fields we see today. The traditional view of this period is one of high mobility. We assume that people were constantly on the move chasing small game and seasonal plants, leaving behind nothing more than fire pits and stone flakes. Gypsum Overlook complicates that picture. The team uncovered the remains of substantial architectural features. These were not temporary windbreaks thrown up for a single night. They were carefully constructed shelters. The builders dug shallow basins into the earth to create a semi-subterranean floor, which provides natural insulation against the desert heat and the cold nights. Around the perimeter of these basins, the archaeologists found post holes indicating a sturdy superstructure of wood and brush. Inside these structures, the team found distinct thermal features or hearths. These were not open bonfires. They were engineered heating elements. The builders used specific types of stone to line the pits, creating thermal mass that would radiate heat long after the fire died down. This demonstrates a clear understanding of thermodynamics and a desire for comfort and efficiency in a harsh environment. The presence of these structures at 8,800 years ago suggests a degree of sedentism that was not supposed to exist yet. It implies that these early archaic people were not just wandering aimlessly across the landscape. They were tethered to specific places. They invested labor and resources into building homes that were meant to last for weeks or even months. This changes our understanding of the social organization of the first Americans. Building structures requires planning. It requires the gathering of materials that might not be immediately available. It suggests a society that is organizing its labor and planning for the future. The people of Gypsum Overlook were not just reacting to the environment. They were modifying it to suit their needs. The site also yielded a wealth of artifacts, including grinding stones and projectile points that bridge the gap between the Paleo-Indian hunters and the later archaic foragers. The assemblage shows a culture in transition, adapting their technology to a changing world. As the great beasts died out and the lakes dried up, they didn't just survive, they settled down. They built roofs over their heads and engineered their hearths to keep their families warm. When we view these two discoveries together, they tell a unified story about human resilience and intelligence. In Tanzania, 1.5 million years ago, our distant ancestors were already mastering the complex physics of bone to create specialized tools. In New Mexico, 8,800 years ago, our direct ancestors were mastering the architecture of the desert to create permanent homes. Both finds challenge the idea that ancient humans were simple or primitive. They prove that innovation is not a modern invention. It is our oldest survival trait. Whether it was shaping a femur into a harpoon or digging a foundation into the desert floor. The drive to engineer a better solution to the problems of survival has always been the defining characteristic of our lineage. The Gypsum Overlook site is currently being preserved, and further analysis of the floor surfaces is planned for the 2026 season. Archaeologists hope to find microscopic traces of pollen and starch, which would tell us exactly what these people were eating and processing inside their homes. In Tanzania, the search continues for more bone tools as researchers re-examine old collections from Olduvai Gorge to see if other artifacts were missed by previous generations who were only looking for stone. These discoveries serve as a reminder that the archaeological record is biased. It favors the hard and the heavy. But the true history of humanity is likely written in the materials that have vanished. The bone tools and the brush huts are the ghosts of our ingenuity, showing us that we have always been makers, builders, and problem solvers long before we ever wrote it down. While some discoveries impress us with their scale, like the massive cities of the Amazon or the shipwrecks of the deep ocean, others captivate us with their intimacy. In 2025, a find in the Caucasus Mountains proved that sometimes the smallest objects tell the biggest stories. A collaborative team of Azerbaijani and Japanese archaeologists working in the Kazakh district of western Azerbaijan uncovered a tiny stone figurine that has rewritten the history of art in the region. The discovery was made in Damjili Cave, a site that has been occupied by humans for millennia. Located at the base of the AV mountain, the cave is a natural shelter that overlooks the river valley, a perfect spot for early hunters and foragers to camp. Archaeologists have been digging here for years, sifting through layers of Neolithic and Mesolithic soil, finding stone tools, animal bones, and the charcoal of ancient fires. But in April 2025, in a layer dated to between 6,400 and 6,100 BC, they found something different. It was a small, carved stone object, no larger than the palm of a hand. As the dirt was brushed away, a shape emerged. It was a human figure. The artifact is associated with the early Shomutepe culture, a local Neolithic group that was just beginning to experiment with agriculture and settled life. The figurine is carved from a soft local stone. It depicts a stylized human form, robust and carefully shaped. Like many prehistoric figurines from this period, it is faceless. The head is a simple, rounded shape without eyes, nose, or mouth. The focus of the artist was not on individual identity, but on the body itself. This lack of facial features connects the Shomutepe figurine to a vast, ancient tradition that stretches across Eurasia. For tens of thousands of years, from the Ice Age Venus figurines of Europe to the seated women of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, early humans created similar images. They are often interpreted as fertility symbols, mother goddesses, or representations of ancestors. The Shomutepe find is significant because it fills a geographic gap. We have many examples of this art form from Europe and the Near East, but the Caucasus region, the bridge between the two, has yielded very few. This figurine proves that the people of the Shomutepe culture were part of this wider symbolic world. They shared a visual language with cultures thousands of miles away, participating in a network of ideas and beliefs that spanned the continent. Microscopic analysis of the figurine revealed traces of red ochre on its surface. This suggests that it was originally painted or rubbed with pigment, perhaps to give it the color of life or blood. Red ochre is a substance deeply linked to ritual and burial in the ancient world, further supporting the idea that this object had a spiritual purpose. What was it used for? We can only speculate. Was it a talisman held during childbirth? A votive offering placed in a shrine to ensure a good harvest? Or perhaps a toy or a teaching tool? The context of the find, inside a cave that was used as a seasonal camp, suggests it was a portable object, something that could be carried in a pouch and set up wherever the group stopped for the night. The discovery also sheds light on the Shomutepe culture itself. These were people in transition. They were moving away from the pure hunter-gatherer lifestyle of the Mesolithic and adopting the new technologies of the Neolithic, farming and herding. This was a time of profound social change. As people began to settle down, their relationship with the land, the seasons, and each other shifted. Art like this figurine may have been a way to negotiate that change, a tangible symbol of continuity in a changing world. Finding art from this period is rare, because so much of it was likely made from perishable materials, wood, clay, or fiber that have rotted away. A stone carving is a deliberate choice for permanence. The artist who made this, more than 8,000 years ago, wanted it to last. They succeeded. The figurine is small, silent, and faceless, but it connects us directly to the person who sat by a fire in Damjili Cave 8 millennia ago, shaping a piece of stone into a form that we still recognize today. Archaeology has a preservation problem. The vast majority of human history was built from materials that rot. Wood, leather, fiber, and skin disintegrate quickly when exposed to the elements, leaving behind only the hard, durable objects like stone and bone. This creates a skewed view of the past, where early societies look simpler than they actually were because 90% of their technology has vanished. We see the arrowheads, but not the bows. We see the stone axes, but not the wooden handles or the ropes used to bind them. But in November 2025, a discovery in far north Queensland, Australia, gave us a rare glimpse into that missing world. A team of researchers, led by archaeologists from the University of Western Australia, working in close collaboration with the Kuku Wara traditional owners, excavated a small rock shelter known as Windmill Way. The site is located in the rugged sandstone hills of the Cape York Peninsula. It is a dry, protected environment, shielded from the rain and the intense tropical sun by a massive overhang. This unique microclimate turned the cave into a time capsule. As the team sifted through the sandy floor of the shelter, they didn't just find stone flakes or charcoal. They found fiber. In total, they recovered more than 500 fragments of ancient textiles. This is the largest collection of ancient fiber artifacts ever found in Australia. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest pieces at around 1,700 years old, with continuous use of the site right up until the late 19th century. Finding a piece of string that is nearly 2,000 years old is miraculous. Finding 500 pieces is a revelation. In most archaeological sites, organic materials like this disappear within decades. Here, they survived for millennia. The collection includes fragments of dilly bags, woven carrying vessels that were essential for daily life. These bags were used to transport food, tools, and personal items, functioning as the backpacks and pockets of the ancient world. The weave is intricate and varied, showing a mastery of different techniques for different purposes. Some were tightly woven to hold small seeds or grains, while others were open meshes designed to carry larger items like tubers or shellfish. The team also found fishing nets, binding cords, and even what appear to be fragments of ceremonial items. The sheer volume of material allows archaeologists to reconstruct the soft technology of the Aboriginal people in incredible detail. Microscopic analysis of the fibers revealed a sophisticated manufacturing process. The makers used specific plant species, harvesting the bark or leaves, stripping them down, and twisting them into consistent two-ply strings. This wasn't a casual activity. It required deep botanical knowledge to select the right plants at the right time of year and skilled hands to process the raw material into durable cordage. The knots used in the nets are identical to those used by modern fishermen, a testament to a technology that was perfected millennia ago and never needed to be improved. This discovery challenges the often stone-centric view of Aboriginal history. For a long time, archaeology in Australia focused heavily on stone tools, scrapers, points, and axes, because that was what survived. This created an image of a culture defined by stone, But Windmill Way shows us that the reality was far richer. Stone tools were important, but they were just one part of the toolkit. The fiber artifacts show us the complexity of daily life. These nets caught the fish that fed the families. These bags carried the yams and the tools. The string bound the spearheads to the shafts. Without this soft technology, the hard stone tools would have been useless. The techniques used to make the 1,700-year-old string are the same techniques used by the Kukuwara elders today. It is a tangible link to deep time, proving that this knowledge has been passed down through roughly 80 generations without breaking. It shows a culture that was stable, adapted, and incredibly resilient. But the Windmill Way site also tells a story of disruption. The timeline of the artifacts ends abruptly in 1874. This date coincides with the arrival of the Palmer River gold rush in the region. Thousands of European miners flooded into the area, bringing with them violence, disease, and displacement. The rock shelter, which had been a safe haven and a workspace for nearly 2 millennia, was suddenly abandoned. Among the final layers of the deposit, archaeologists found 2 European objects, a piece of hooked wire and a strip of red cloth. These were likely traded or scavenged items, the first signs of a new world that would ultimately force the people of Windmill Way to leave their home. The abandonment of the site freezes that moment of contact in time. The nets were left unfinished. The bags were dropped. The shelter went from a living space to a museum of memory. It suggests a sudden departure, a moment when the traditional rhythms of life were broken by external forces. For the Kukuwara people, the find is more than just archaeology. It is a validation of their oral history and a physical connection to the ancestors who sat in that same cave, twisting fiber into string, preserving a way of life that survived for thousands of years before the gold rush ended it. As the artifacts are conserved and studied, they will provide a new baseline for understanding indigenous technology. And it makes us look at every rock shelter and cave with new eyes, wondering what other fragile histories might be waiting in the dry dust, hidden from the rain and the sun. In the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, the city of Pompeii has been uncovering its secrets for nearly 300 years. We have walked its streets, entered its shops, and seen the plaster casts of its final victims. It is easy to think that Pompeii has nothing left to show us, that we have seen every fresco and every mosaic. But in April 2025, archaeologists working in a newly excavated sector known as Regio 9 uncovered a room that stopped the world in its tracks. It was a banquet hall, but unlike any other found in the city. The walls were not painted in the bright Pompeian red or the sunny yellows typical of Roman dining rooms. They were painted entirely black. This was the Black Room. It is a space of profound, almost Gothic beauty, designed for the night. The archaeologists, led by park director Gabriel Zuchtriegel, realized immediately that the choice of color was practical as well as aesthetic. The black background was intended to hide the soot and smoke from the oil lamps that would have lit the room during evening feasts, but it also served a dramatic purpose. Against the pitch-black walls, the Roman artists painted scenes of vibrant color and intense emotion. The frescoes depict characters from the Trojan War, but not the scenes of battle we might expect. Instead, they focus on moments of quiet tension and fateful choice. On one wall, we see Helen of Troy meeting Paris, the Prince of Troy. It is the moment before the abduction or the elopement that would launch 1,000 ships and destroy a civilization. Helen's face is thoughtful, almost hesitant. She is not a pawn, but a woman weighing her destiny. On another wall is Cassandra, the Trojan priestess cursed by Apollo to see the future, but never be believed. She sits with the god, her face shadowed by the knowledge of the doom that is coming for her city. It is a haunting image to find in Pompeii, a city that was itself living on borrowed time, ignoring the tremors that signaled its own destruction. The artistry is exceptional. The figures are painted with a level of naturalism and psychological depth that is rare in Roman art. The eyes of the characters seem to follow you. The details of their clothing and jewelry are rendered with delicate brushstrokes that shimmered in the torchlight. But the Black Room is more than just an art gallery. It allows us to reconstruct the sensory experience of a Roman feast. This was a room designed for the elite. We can imagine the couches arranged in a U shape, covered in purple fabrics. We can smell the oil of the lamps and the spiced wine. We can hear the conversation. The choice of mythological subjects was not accidental. In Roman dining culture, the art on the walls was meant to spark debate. Guests would look at Helen in Paris and discuss the nature of love and fate. Was Helen guilty? Was Paris a hero or a fool? They would look at Cassandra and talk about the burden of prophecy. The room was an intellectual theater, a place where the wealthy could show off their education and their taste. The floor of the room is equally impressive. It is paved with a pristine white mosaic, a stark contrast to the black walls. The effect would have been striking. Guests walking on a field of white, surrounded by the dark void of the walls, with the mythological figures floating in the lamplight like ghosts. The excavation also revealed the practical side of this luxury. Adjacent to the Black Room was a service courtyard with a staircase leading to the second floor. Beneath the stairs, archaeologists found a pile of construction materials, blocks of tuff, bags of lime, and stacks of roof tiles. This confirms that the house was undergoing renovation when the volcano erupted. The owner, likely a wealthy politician or merchant, was investing in his property, upgrading his home with the latest artistic trends. He was planning for the future. The workmen had likely just put down their tools for the day when the mountain exploded. This context makes the Black Room even more poignant. It captures the precise moment when the music stopped. The frescoes are pristine because they were never aged by time. They were enjoyed for perhaps only a few weeks or months before they were buried. The people who dined here were not so different from us. They gathered with friends, they drank wine, and they talked about the stories that mattered to them, trying to make sense of the human condition. They sat in their elegant black room, surrounded by images of Troy's destruction, discussing the fall of ancient cities, completely unaware that their own city was about to vanish. For most of our list, we have been digging in the dirt. We have explored the mud of the jungle valleys, the sand of Egypt, and the silt of the ocean floor. But our final discovery of 2025 proves that sometimes the most significant treasures aren't buried in the ground. They are hiding in plain sight. The Magna Carta is arguably the most famous legal document in the Western world. Signed by King John at Runnymede in 1215, it established the principle that everyone, even the king, is subject to the law. It is the foundation of modern democracy, influencing everything from the U.S. Constitution to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because of its fame, we tend to assume that every copy of it is accounted for, locked away in high-security vaults in London, Oxford, or Washington. But in 2025, a researcher working in the archives of Harvard University found one that everyone had forgotten. The document in question is an original Magna Carta issued in 1300 by King Edward I. While the 1215 version is the most famous, it was actually a failed peace treaty that was annulled by the Pope almost immediately. It was the later reissues by Henry III and Edward I that actually enshrined the Great Charter into English law. The 1300 version is particularly important because it was the final time the Charter was confirmed under the King's seal as a standalone document. It represents the moment when the radical ideas of 1215 became the permanent law of the land. So how did a priceless piece of history end up lost in a university library? The story is a lesson in the fragility of memory. The charter had been donated to Harvard in the early 20th century by a wealthy alumnus. At the time, it was likely celebrated, but over the decades, through changes in cataloging systems, administrative turnover, and perhaps a simple clerical error, its significance was erased. It was mislabeled. It sat in a drawer or a box, perhaps tagged simply as medieval deed or legal manuscript. its true identity, hidden by a vague description. It wasn't until a historian, conducting a survey of the university's medieval legal collections, decided to take a closer look at this misidentified item that the truth was revealed. As they unfolded the parchment, they saw the distinctive script of the royal chancery. They saw the seal of Edward I. They realized they weren't holding a property deed. They were holding the birth certificate of the rule of law. This kind of discovery is known as archival archaeology. It is the realization that our museums and libraries are so vast, so stuffed with millions of objects collected over centuries, that we often don't know what we have. In the 18th and 19th centuries, wealthy collectors and institutions bought up artifacts by the crate load. They didn't always have the expertise to identify what they were buying, and they didn't always keep good records. A curator might catalog a sword as Roman when it is actually Celtic. A librarian might shelve a manuscript as religious text when it is actually a lost scientific treatise. The Harvard Magna Carta is a symbol of this dark data. It estimates that in major institutions like the British Museum, the Smithsonian, or the Vatican archives, only a fraction of the collection is on display, or even fully digitized. The rest sits in storage, waiting for someone to ask the right question or open the right box. This discovery forces us to confront a strange reality. We are losing history as fast as we find it. For every city we map with LiDAR, there is a document crumbling in a basement because no one knows it's there. For every tomb we open in Egypt, there is a crate of artifacts from a 1920s excavation that has never been opened, sitting in a warehouse in London or New York. Because if a document as famous as the Magna Carta can get lost in one of the world's most prestigious universities, what else is hiding in the dark? What lost plays of Shakespeare? What maps of ancient explorers? What blueprints of forgotten machines are sitting on a shelf right now, labeled miscellaneous? The year 2025 has shown us that the past is not a static thing. It is not dead. It is dynamic. It changes every time we turn on a LiDAR scanner, every time we run a DNA sequence, and every time we open a dusty box in a library basement. From the ghost lineages of South America to the sealed vaults of Hungary, and from the sunken temples of Canopus to the mislabeled shelves of Harvard, the message of this year is clear. We have only scratched the surface. The earth is full of lost cities. The oceans are full of lost ships. And our own archives are full of lost words. But archaeology is a field that changes every day. We know there are discoveries happening right now that didn't make this list because they haven't been announced yet. So we want to hear from you. Did we miss a major find that blew your mind this year? Is there a local discovery in your part of the world that deserves more attention? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of our world, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep the lights on and the expeditions going. Thanks as always for watching. This has been Uncharted Mysteries, and as always, until next time, stay curious.